August 6th, 1848. At 5 in the afternoon, a Royal Navy frigate sailing through the South Atlantic encountered something its officers could not identify. Captain Peter McQuay of HMS Daedalus watched an enormous creature pass within roughly 200 yards of his ship. It was approximately 60 feet long. Its head remained about 4 feet above the surface, and for 20 uninterrupted minutes it held its course while the captain, first lieutenant, sailing master, and multiple members of the crew watched from the deck. McQuay later wrote that it passed close enough that, had the creature been a man of his acquaintance, he could have recognized his features with the naked eye. Then he signed his name to the account and submitted it to the British Admiralty. This was not a tavern story. It became an official naval report, and it was not the first time something like this had happened. 31 years earlier, more than 200 people around Gloucester Harbor, Massachusetts, reported an enormous serpentine creature moving through the water. The Linnean Society of New England took the sightings seriously enough to investigate. 10 sworn statements were collected from witnesses regarded as credible members of their community. The creature was even formally named Scoliophus atlanticus. No specimen was ever recovered, yet remarkably similar descriptions continued appearing across different oceans and different centuries. Norway, Scotland, Brazil, Japan, New England. Witnesses separated by enormous distances repeatedly described elongated serpentine animals unlike anything they recognized. And then science began discovering creatures that sailors had been describing long before anyone could prove they existed. In 2004, scientists photographed a living giant squid in its natural habitat for the first time, roughly 3,000 feet beneath the Pacific. It was an animal that had spent centuries drifting between maritime legend and biological reality. And it was not the only one. At least 3 animals capable of explaining historical sea serpent reports were eventually confirmed to exist. One is alive right now in deep water across every ocean on Earth. It has never been successfully maintained alive in captivity, and science has never observed a healthy individual for long enough to fully understand how it lives. Something was in the water. Hundreds of witnesses said so. Naval officers, naturalists, clergymen, and other respected observers put their names behind what they saw. And eventually, the ocean began confirming parts of their stories, one animal at a time. In this video, we're following those reports into the deep ocean to uncover what those witnesses may actually have seen, and why the biological explanations can be stranger than the legends themselves. Long before the ocean became a place of sonar maps and remotely operated machines, it existed as an immense expanse whose greatest depths remained beyond imagination. Even now, only about 1/5 of the seafloor has been mapped in high resolution. The rest still waits beneath miles of water, shaped by mountain ranges, trenches, and plains that no human eye has directly seen. For mariners of earlier centuries, that unknown was far greater. Once the shoreline slipped below the horizon, the world ahead dissolved into possibility, where every swell concealed a landscape without boundaries. Life aboard a sailing vessel offered remarkable familiarity with the sea's surface while revealing almost nothing of the world beneath it. Crews learned the language of tides, prevailing winds, changing weather, and coastal fisheries through long experience. They knew where seabirds gathered, where whales often appeared, and how currents carried a ship from one continent toward another. Yet the open ocean itself remained an unseen realm. The idea of a thriving deep-sea ecosystem had not yet entered human understanding. The abyss was not viewed as a living environment, but as an immeasurable darkness whose contents could only be inferred from the rare moments when something emerged. Observation itself carried hidden limitations. A sailor usually watched from a wooden deck only about 50 to 60 feet above the water, trying to judge distance through shifting reflections, rolling waves, and uneven light. Every rise of the ship altered perspective. Every trough concealed part of the view. An animal surfacing only briefly might reveal one shape before disappearing and another upon its return. Even before memory began arranging those fragments into a complete picture, the sea had already distorted what the eyes received. Knowledge during the centuries before the scientific revolution followed different pathways than those familiar today. Careful observation certainly mattered, yet testimony from respected people carried tremendous authority alongside direct experience. Clergymen, merchants, scholars, and experienced navigators formed a chain through which information traveled. When several trustworthy witnesses described an unfamiliar marine creature, their reports entered the growing record of nature without a rigid boundary separating the extraordinary from the ordinary. The unknown was not automatically dismissed. It was cataloged until better evidence appeared. Natural historians embraced that approach with genuine seriousness. During the 1600s, scholars such as Olaus Magnus and Conrad Gessner assembled remarkable encyclopedias describing animals from across Europe and beyond. Within their pages, seals, whales, fish, birds, and serpentine sea creatures shared the same printed space. These works were not collections of fantasy presented for amusement. They represented sincere attempts to gather the best available knowledge from sailors, fishermen, travelers, and local authorities whose lives unfolded beside the water. Educated readers accepted these volumes as windows into creation itself, where certainty and mystery naturally coexisted. Such a worldview reflected neither foolishness nor carelessness. It emerged from an honest recognition that enormous portions of Earth remained inaccessible. The ocean concealed its inhabitants with astonishing effectiveness. Creatures that spent nearly their entire existence far below the reach of sunlight could pass through generations without leaving more than a fleeting glimpse at the surface. A single encounter might become the only evidence anyone ever obtained. Against that vast backdrop, unusual reports acquired a different meaning than they hold today. They were attempts to describe encounters occurring at the edge of available knowledge, where language strained against experience and certainty gave way to careful testimony. Blank spaces on maps represented more than missing geography. They marked the boundary between what humanity had already named and what still drifted beyond recognition, carried through dark water that remained every bit as expansive as the imagination that sought to understand it. Among the countless creatures that inhabit the sea, one carries a silhouette so improbable that it seems designed for legend before biology. Its name is Regelicus glest, the giant oarfish, a living ribbon that holds the confirmed record as the longest bony fish on Earth. Reliably measured individuals have reached about 36 feet in length, while older historical accounts speak of specimens approaching 50 feet. Long before science assembled those measurements, sailors had already been trying to describe the same impossible shape. Nothing about its appearance resembles the familiar outline of an ordinary fish. The body is remarkably thin from side to side, broad like a polished ribbon, and covered in metallic scales that catch available light with a shifting silver sheen. Running from the crown of the head to the very end of the body is a brilliant crimson dorsal fin composed of more than 400 delicate fin rays. Instead of fading into the background, this scarlet crest creates a striking border that remains visible even when much of the animal disappears beneath the surface. The head itself is unexpectedly modest, ending in a blunt face crowned by elongated red spines that resemble a feathered comb. Across centuries of maritime testimony, witnesses repeatedly described enormous creatures bearing fiery manes or crests rising above the water. Those descriptions appeared in reports, separated by oceans and generations, written by people who had no opportunity to compare observations. The resemblance becomes remarkably close when viewed beside the anatomy of a living oarfish. For most of recorded history, however, almost nobody encountered a healthy individual where it truly belonged. The species spends nearly its entire life far below the familiar world of ships, descending to depths approaching 3,000 feet. Human contact came almost exclusively through unusual circumstances: an exhausted fish drifting upward, an injured animal struggling near the surface, or a carcass carried ashore by currents became the only available evidence. Every historical encounter therefore involved an animal behaving outside its normal existence, presenting an appearance that even modern observers rarely witness. Seen from the deck of a sailing vessel, only fragments of the fish might emerge between passing swells. A gleaming section of body appeared, then disappeared. The crimson crest remained visible slightly longer before slipping beneath the next wave. Distance removed much of the animal's outline, leaving only disconnected glimpses that the eye naturally assembled into a continuous serpentine form. What looked like an enormous undulating creature was often a single ribbon-shaped fish moving through uneven water. Across Japan, the oarfish earned a name that reflects centuries of fascination. It became known as Ryugu no Tsukai, the messenger from the sea god's palace. The title emerged because appearances at the surface were astonishingly uncommon, arriving without warning, and often ending with the fish stranded along the shoreline. Cultural traditions gradually linked those rare strandings with approaching earthquakes. Scientific studies have never established a confirmed mechanism connecting the two events, yet the belief remains woven into coastal communities. Interest deepened after research published during 2011 documented several oarfish beachings in the months preceding the Tohoku earthquake, although researchers emphasized that correlation alone could not establish cause. Modern exploration has revealed another detail that transforms many historical accounts. Rather than swimming only in a horizontal posture, the giant oarfish is capable of holding itself almost vertically, with its head pointing upward while the immense body extends downward into darkness. When only the upper portion reaches the surface, an observer sees little more than a narrow head crowned with crimson rays. The rest of the animal remains concealed beneath the water column, giving the impression that an immense unseen body continues far below. Remarkably, this behavior was confirmed only during the present century, through observations of living animals in their natural habitat. Without intending to, generations of mariners had been describing a real creature whose most extraordinary habit remained unknown even to science until remarkably recently. Few creatures have traveled a longer path from legend into zoology than the giant squid. For generations, it occupied an uncertain place between observation and imagination, appearing in sailors' journals, coastal traditions, and natural histories before vanishing again beneath the sea. Its scientific name, Architeuthis dux, would eventually anchor those scattered encounters to a real animal, although that certainty arrived only after centuries, during which evidence drifted ashore in fragments rather than complete forms. During 1857, the Danish zoologist Japetus Steenstrup gathered those fragments into something more enduring. Instead of dismissing broken remains as curiosities, he examined recovered beaks and pieces of stranded tissue with careful attention. From those incomplete clues, he formally described a species that almost nobody had seen intact. It was an extraordinary moment in natural history, because the world's largest invertebrate entered scientific classification before anyone possessed a complete specimen to examine. That missing evidence arrived during 1873 on the coast of Newfoundland. Reverend Moses Harvey purchased a freshly recovered giant squid from a local fisherman for $10 and preserved one of the earliest photographic records ever made of the animal. Draped across an iron support inside his home, the specimen measured roughly 15 feet from the mantle to the tip of its tentacles. The image spread far beyond Newfoundland, replacing artistic interpretations with the unmistakable outline of an actual creature whose proportions seemed almost untouched by ordinary experience. Living giant squid grow far beyond that early specimen. Adult females may reach approximately 43 feet in total length, making them among the largest predators without a backbone ever known. Their most remarkable feature is neither their length nor their arms, but their eyes. Each eye may approach 11 inches across, larger than that of any living animal. Such enormous vision serves a practical purpose within the deep ocean, where sunlight never reaches. At depths approaching 3,000 feet, faint flashes produced by glowing organisms may reveal the movement of prey or the approach of an enormous hunter long before any body becomes visible. From the perspective of a ship crossing open water, the outline of a surfacing giant squid could easily defy familiar categories. The rounded mantle remains at the front, while two exceptionally long feeding tentacles stream behind, stretching far beyond the central body. At a distance, with waves concealing different portions from moment to moment, the visible shape becomes an elongated form of uncertain boundaries. Rather than appearing as separate limbs attached to a compact animal, the tentacles and mantle merge into a single flowing silhouette that resembles one continuous marine giant. For much of history, no one could determine how such an animal behaved while alive. That uncertainty persisted until September 30th, 2004, when Japanese researchers Tsunemi Kubodera and Kyoichi Mori lowered a baited camera into deep water near the Ogasawara Islands. Positioned at roughly 900 feet below the surface, the equipment recorded something that earlier generations had only imagined. A giant squid, measuring about 26 feet in length, approached with speed, seized the bait, and extended its tentacles in an energetic struggle. The photographs revealed an active predator rather than a drifting curiosity carried upward by misfortune. Those images also cast older stories in a different light. During 1752, Bishop Eric Pontoppidan compiled detailed accounts of the kraken, describing an immense creature whose broad back resembled a floating island surrounded by trailing growth. Viewed through modern understanding, that description aligns remarkably well with a large squid resting near the surface, its rounded mantle exposed, while long arms spread outward across the water. The resemblance no longer depends upon mythology, but upon anatomy observed across centuries by different eyes. The photographs from 2004 did more than confirm a famous species. They demonstrated that an animal once dismissed as fantasy hunted with strength appeared nearer the surface than many expected, and possessed exactly the kind of presence that had lingered in maritime testimony for generations. The legend remained transformed, not by diminishing the creature, but by revealing that reality had quietly carried its own astonishing answer beneath the waves all along. Not every sea monster began as a living animal moving through the waves. Some began only after life had ended, when the sea itself became the sculptor. Time, currents, scavengers, and decay could reshape a familiar creature into a form so unfamiliar that even experienced naturalists struggled to recognize it. Among all known marine animals, none demonstrates this transformation more convincingly than the basking shark. The basking shark is the second largest fish alive, reaching lengths of about 40 feet. Despite its immense size, it poses little danger to anything larger than drifting plankton. With its enormous mouth held open, it glides slowly through productive waters, filtering countless tiny organisms from the sea. It neither hunts ships nor pursues large prey. In life, its broad head and unmistakable profile leave little room for confusion. Death changes that profile with remarkable speed. The first structures to disappear are the lower jaw and the delicate framework supporting the gills. Those tissues are connected by relatively fragile cartilage that breaks down far sooner than the sturdy backbone. Once they separate, the familiar shark shape vanishes. What remains is a much smaller skull, connected to an unusually long column of vertebrae, creating the striking illusion of a narrow neck extending from a modest head. Other parts of the body continue changing as decomposition advances. The broad pectoral fins remain attached for a time, although they twist and distort as supporting tissue weakens. At the tail, the lower lobe usually detaches first, while the upper portion remains connected to the spine. Instead of a recognizable shark tail, observers now see a long tapering extension resembling the body of a giant serpent. Male basking sharks introduce another layer of confusion because their paired reproductive organs remain visible, creating the appearance of additional limbs projecting from the body. Meanwhile, the surrounding muscle undergoes a transformation equally deceptive. Fibrous tissue loosens into pale strands that drift outward with the current. What had once been dense muscle begins resembling coarse white hair gathered around the neck and shoulders. Combined with the elongated spine and altered fins, the carcass no longer resembles any shark familiar to the human eye. Without exaggeration, it can appear as a long-necked creature bearing a mane and several limb-like appendages, remarkably similar to the popular image of an ancient marine reptile. Biologists eventually recognized this recurring illusion so often that they gave it a specific name. Such remains are known as pseudoplesiosaurs, meaning false plesiosaurs. The label reflects how convincingly a decomposing basking shark imitates the proportions of a prehistoric reptile without sharing any biological relationship. This is not an isolated curiosity, but a predictable consequence of anatomy and decomposition acting together. One of the most celebrated examples arrived during 1808, when an enormous carcass washed ashore on the island of Stronsay in Scotland's Orkney Islands. Contemporary measurements described a body approximately 55 feet long, complete with a narrow neck, unusual appendages, and a mane-like covering a long part of its surface. Members of the Wernerian Natural History Society of Edinburgh examined testimony and preserved samples before declaring the remains an entirely new species, which they named Halcydrus pontoppidanii. Only later did the anatomist Sir Everard Home study surviving cartilage and conclude that the mysterious beast had been nothing more exotic than a decomposing basking shark. More than a century later, the same sequence unfolded again. During 1977, the Japanese fishing vessel Zuio Maru recovered another decayed carcass from the Pacific Ocean near New Zealand. Photographs spread rapidly through newspapers and magazines, and many observers proposed that the remains belonged to a surviving prehistoric reptile. Tissue samples told a different story. Amino acid analysis matched basking shark tissue rather than any reptilian anatomy. The conclusion demonstrated that this remarkable transformation was not unique to a single historical event. Nature itself had repeatedly produced an illusion persuasive enough to deceive witnesses, respected scientific institutions, and entire generations. simply by allowing one familiar animal to follow the ordinary course of decay beneath the sea. Morning light can be surprisingly deceptive upon open water. As the sun climbs higher, countless reflections shimmer across the surface, flattening distance and softening boundaries until separate movements begin to blend together. Within that shifting brightness, a procession of ordinary marine mammals can become something entirely different, not because the animals have changed, but because the human mind is built to weave scattered pieces into a single continuous form. Common dolphins and harbor porpoises rarely travel as isolated individuals. They move as coordinated groups, maintaining spacing that allows each animal to surface for air in rhythmic succession. One curved back breaks the surface, then slips beneath the water. A moment later, another appears several feet away, followed by another, each repeating the same graceful motion. Viewed from nearby, the pattern is unmistakable. Viewed from a distant vessel, however, especially across bright reflections and gentle swells, those individual surfacings merge into what appears to be one long creature rising and falling through the sea. The illusion becomes even stronger because the observer never sees the entire group at once. Every animal spends far more time beneath the surface than above it. One disappears just as another emerges farther ahead, creating the impression that a continuous body is traveling beneath the waves while only portions briefly reveal themselves. The eye naturally connects each appearance into an uninterrupted sequence. Instead of several dolphins, perception constructs a single undulating form whose length seems far greater than any individual animal. This possibility sheds remarkable light upon one of the most celebrated sea serpent episodes in North American history. During 1817, residents of Gloucester, Massachusetts, reported repeated encounters with an enormous marine creature visible offshore. Witnesses described a body divided into separate humps, comparing it to a string of buoys or a row of floating kegs. They also remarked upon its smooth vertical undulation as it traveled across the water. Those details, preserved in numerous independent accounts, correspond strikingly with the appearance of a line of dolphins surfacing one after another while swimming in formation. Behavior described during the Gloucester observations also aligns closely with the habits of foraging marine mammals. Reports placed the mysterious animal among dense schools of herring, where it often moved in broad looping paths rather than following a straight course. Dolphins and harbor porpoises frequently circle bait fish, gradually tightening their movements to concentrate prey before feeding. Such patterns produce repeated passes through the same stretch of water, allowing multiple observers to believe they are watching the prolonged activity of one immense creature instead of an organized hunting group. The geography surrounding Gloucester strengthens that interpretation. The harbor lies beside productive continental shelf waters that seasonally attract Atlantic white-sided dolphins and harbor porpoises in considerable numbers. Historical records from the summer of 1817 also describe unusually abundant herring schools, providing exactly the conditions expected to gather large marine mammals into concentrated feeding assemblies. Without any unusual species present, the environment itself naturally favored the formation of striking visual displays. Modern neuroscience offers an additional layer of understanding. The human visual system constantly organizes incomplete information into meaningful patterns. Scientists describe one aspect of this process as gestalt grouping, a tendency to combine nearby objects moving together into a single coherent whole. Rather than interpreting each element independently, the brain favors continuity, reducing complexity by creating one larger object from several smaller parts that share similar motion and spacing. That tendency becomes especially influential at sea, where accurate judgments of scale and distance are notoriously difficult. A person standing upon the deck of a rolling vessel receives only brief glimpses, separated by changing angles, reflected light, and moving water. The visual cortex performs exactly as it evolved to perform, filling gaps between observations and presenting the most coherent interpretation available from limited evidence. Within that process lies an important distinction. The witnesses did not need to exaggerate, invent, or mislead anyone. Their reports faithfully described what perception delivered to consciousness after assembling countless fleeting impressions into one complete image. The resulting sea serpent existed as a genuine experience shaped by ordinary biology, both beneath the waves and within the remarkable architecture of the human brain. Official reports often preserve moments with a restraint that makes them more compelling than dramatic storytelling. Ink settles onto paper without embellishment, recording bearings, weather, positions, and observations intended for professional scrutiny rather than public fascination. Among the countless logbooks produced during the Great Age of Sail, one entry has remained remarkably difficult to set aside, not because it proved the existence of an unknown monster, but because it documented an encounter witnessed by experienced naval officers who understood the weight carried by every written word. On the 6th of August, 1848, the Royal Navy frigate Daedalus was returning from China while crossing the South Atlantic, roughly 300 miles west of the coast of present-day Namibia. During the voyage, Midshipman Sartoris called the attention of the quarterdeck toward an unusual object moving through the sea. What followed unfolded slowly enough that those aboard had ample opportunity to watch rather than merely glimpse the phenomenon. Captain Peter McQuay, the first lieutenant, the sailing master, and several members of the crew observed the creature for approximately 20 minutes. It maintained a steady course toward the south-southwest without obvious deviation, eventually passing within about 200 yards of the ship. Unlike many earlier reports that depended upon a fleeting appearance between waves, this observation continued long enough for multiple witnesses to compare impressions while the object remained in view. Captain McQuay later submitted an official report to the Admiralty describing what he had seen. He estimated that at least 60 feet of the animal remained visible above the surface, while the head rose approximately 4 feet above the waterline. Its speed appeared close to 15 miles per hour. Most memorable was his description of something resembling a mane of seaweed washing backward along its neck or upper body as it advanced through the water. The language remained measured throughout, avoiding speculation while carefully recording visible features. Independent documentation strengthened the account. Lieutenant Edward Arthur Drummond entered the event into his personal diary during the same evening and prepared 2 sketches illustrating the animal's appearance. Those drawings remained unpublished until 1997, long after the principal witnesses had passed from history. They portrayed a long, slender body with a small, flattened head and a distinct hump farther behind, preserving details that aligned closely with the written descriptions rather than expanding upon them. The report immediately attracted scientific attention, although agreement proved impossible. Richard Owen, one of Britain's leading anatomists, argued publicly that the officers had probably mistaken an elephant seal for something more extraordinary. Thomas Henry Huxley expressed skepticism toward several proposed interpretations without fully endorsing a single alternative. Other naturalists suggested a giant squid, an oarfish, an immense eel, or even a surviving marine reptile. Through every stage of the debate, Captain McQuee remained consistent. He neither withdrew his statement nor altered its essential details, despite considerable public discussion. Modern analysis has gradually shifted toward a more conventional explanation without diminishing the significance of the observation itself. Science writer Gary Galbraith proposed that the officers had most likely encountered a sei whale engaged in skim feeding near the surface. Adult sei whales may reach approximately 60 feet in length, matching the reported scale remarkably well. During feeding, the upper portion of the head can remain elevated while water flows through baleen plates that hang inside the mouth. From a distance, especially under changing light, those flexible structures could resemble trailing vegetation or a coarse mane. The position of the whale's dorsal fin also corresponds closely with the location of the hump described by the witnesses. The enduring importance of the Daedalus encounter rests less upon identifying the animal than upon the quality of the evidence surrounding it. Trained Royal Navy officers observed the phenomenon together for an extended period, recorded their impressions immediately, and preserved them through official and personal documents created before memory had time to soften details. The event demonstrates that even disciplined observers can encounter living creatures whose appearance exceeds expectation, leaving behind records that continue inviting careful examination rather than easy dismissal. Legends sometimes gather slowly across generations, then, for reasons that remain difficult to explain, suddenly step into the center of public attention. Along the waters off Cape Ann in Massachusetts, stories of an unusual marine creature had circulated since the early colonial period. The earliest surviving account dates to 1638, when an elongated animal was reportedly observed offshore. For nearly 2 centuries, those reports remained scattered, woven into local conversation more than national discussion. Then the summer of 1817 transformed a familiar coastal tale into one of the most closely examined natural history controversies in the young United States. During a single month, more than 200 people claimed to have seen the mysterious visitor. Newspapers carried fresh accounts almost daily, drawing attention from far beyond New England. Witnesses described an animal between roughly 80 and 100 feet long, dark brown or nearly black, with a head resembling that of a horse and a body rising and falling through the water in smooth vertical undulations. Several observers insisted that it occasionally held its head several feet above the surface, while feeding among abundant schools of fish close to shore. The remarkable consistency of many descriptions encouraged investigators to approach the reports with unusual seriousness. Rather than dismissing the observations as rumor, the Linnean Society of New England assembled an emergency committee on the 18th of August, 1817. The inquiry was chaired by a respected United States District Court judge, reflecting the importance assigned to the investigation. Members collected 10 sworn depositions from individuals described as men of unblemished character, including experienced sea captains and fishermen whose livelihoods depended upon recognizing marine life accurately under changing conditions. After reviewing the available testimony, the society concluded that the witnesses had encountered an undescribed species. Without possessing a complete specimen, they assigned the creature the scientific name Scoliophis atlanticus. Such a decision may appear surprising today, yet it reflected the scientific customs of an era when reliable eyewitness testimony still carried considerable weight in natural history. Earlier generations had repeatedly described unfamiliar animals long before preserved specimens reached museums. Within that historical framework, naming the creature represented an earnest attempt to organize knowledge rather than an abandonment of scientific caution. Events during the following autumn demonstrated how difficult interpretation could become once expectation entered the picture. Two boys discovered a small snake measuring about 3 feet in length along the beach. The animal possessed unusual growths projecting from its spine, apparently caused by disease. Members of the investigative committee proposed that the specimen represented a juvenile Scoliophus atlanticus, offering what seemed to them the first physical evidence supporting the earlier reports. That conclusion did not endure. Naturalist Alexandre Lesueur later examined the remains and identified the animal as an ordinary black snake whose spinal tumors had produced its unusual appearance. Even after that correction, the sightings did not simply disappear. Reports continued through 1818 and 1819, suggesting that public interest alone could not account for every observation. Additional clusters emerged throughout the 19th century. Contemporary records mention 12 reported encounters during 1839, 9 during 1875, and 13 during 1886. By the closing years of the century, nearly 190 sightings had been logged from the New England coast during that decade alone, preserving one of the largest collections of sea serpent testimony ever assembled within a single region. Modern researchers generally regard coordinated groups of dolphins or harbor porpoises as the strongest explanation for the dramatic surge during 1817, particularly because the reported behavior coincided with unusually abundant herring that attracted feeding marine mammals. That interpretation accounts convincingly for many distant observations viewed under bright conditions across reflective water. Yet, not every testimony fits comfortably within the same framework. A handful of witnesses described encounters at comparatively close range, offering details that remain difficult to reconcile completely with dolphins moving in formation. For that reason, the Gloucester episode occupies an unusual place in the history of marine mysteries. Many individual reports have plausible explanations. The broader pattern has persuasive scientific interpretations, yet the complete collection of evidence has never been resolved to universal agreement, allowing the record itself to remain an enduring part of natural history rather than a story fully closed. Long before coastlines could be surveyed with precision, a map represented something far greater than geography alone. It gathered experience from countless voyages into a single image, preserving not only harbors and currents, but also everything sailors believed they had encountered beyond familiar shores. Empty stretches of ocean invited testimony as naturally as they invited imagination, and each returning vessel carried another fragment to be added beside the last. Across parchment, those fragments gradually accumulated into a visual memory of the sea itself. Among the most influential of these works was the Carta Marina, completed by Olaus Magnus during 1539. It stood as the most detailed depiction of Scandinavia and the northern seas produced to that time. Along its coastlines and across broad expanses of open water appeared an extraordinary collection of marine creatures. Coiling serpents wrapped themselves around ships, enormous scaled animals emerged beside rocky shores, and vast whale-like forms floated upon the surface, inviting the unwary to mistake living bodies for islands. To modern eyes, the illustrations resembled decorative fantasy, yet the purpose behind them was considerably more practical. Magnus did not invent the beings that filled his chart. Throughout years of travel and correspondence, he gathered descriptions from sailors, fishermen, merchants, and members of the clergy living along the coasts of Norway, Sweden, and Iceland. Each account contributed another detail to a growing body of maritime knowledge. The resulting map was intended as a serious reference work, combining navigation, commerce, history, and natural observation Its remarkable creatures occupy the same intellectual landscape as its carefully drawn coastlines, because both were believed to describe the world as faithfully as available evidence allowed. The relationship between observation and illustration became increasingly complex as maps circulated across Europe. Medieval and Renaissance cartographers frequently borrowed marine creatures from earlier charts and natural history encyclopedias, many of which had themselves been assembled from generations of sailors' testimony. Each copied image acquired greater authority simply through repetition. A navigator who had studied such illustrations before departing already possessed an expectation of what unfamiliar waters might contain. Later observations naturally passed through that expectation, while fresh reports encouraged artists to reproduce the same forms once again. Over time, testimony and illustration reinforced one another in a continuous exchange that blurred the distinction between first-hand experience and inherited tradition. One famous phrase has often become associated with those unexplored waters. The Latin words meaning, "here are dragons," appear upon only a single known historical globe, the Hunt Lennox globe, created around 1510. Despite its modern popularity, the phrase was never a common feature of medieval cartography. The broader practice proved far more widespread. From roughly the 10th century through the 17th century, mapmakers regularly marked uncertain seas with drawings of extraordinary marine life instead of written warnings. Such images communicated uncertainty more effectively than empty space, reminding travelers that knowledge diminished beyond established routes. The meaning of the word monster also differed from modern usage. Medieval classification emphasized rarity, immense size, and unfamiliar appearance rather than impossibility. Whales, walruses, and basking sharks could all be described as monsters because they exceeded ordinary experience and remained poorly understood. Within that intellectual framework, a verified animal and a legendary creature occupied neighboring positions rather than opposite categories. The boundary separating them shifted whenever new observations arrived or older interpretations changed. Modern scholarship has offered a revealing perspective upon this tradition. During 2013, map historian Chet Van Duzer of the Library of Congress examined hundreds of medieval and Renaissance maps while tracing the origins of their remarkable inhabitants. His research suggested that many creatures appearing fantastical today were rooted in encounters with genuine animals whose forms changed through repeated retelling, artistic interpretation, translation between languages, and the unavoidable uncertainty of distant observation. The maps, therefore, preserve more than folklore. They reveal a long conversation between human perception and the living ocean, where every generation inherited both the discoveries and the misunderstandings of those who had sailed before, leaving behind charts that reflected the evolving limits of knowledge as faithfully as they reflected the shape of the world. No matter how carefully a person watches the sea, every observation begins inside a nervous system shaped for a very different world. Human vision evolved across forests, grasslands, and rocky ground where nearby landmarks continually reveal distance, scale, and movement. Trees frame the horizon, hills provide perspective, and familiar objects offer constant comparisons. The open ocean removes nearly all of those references, leaving the brain to interpret an immense surface where size, direction, and identity become unexpectedly uncertain. Even the behavior of light changes before it reaches the observer. Water bends and reflects light differently than air, altering the apparent position and dimensions of objects near the surface. Under favorable angles, refraction may enlarge the apparent size of a floating or partially submerged animal by as much as 1/3. A creature measuring only 10 feet in length can therefore appear substantially larger when viewed from the elevated deck of a ship, especially if portions of its body repeatedly disappear beneath moving waves before returning into view. That uncertainty grows because the ocean rarely offers anything suitable for comparison. On land, the height of a doorway, the width of a road, or the size of another person constantly calibrates visual judgment. Offshore, those familiar guides vanish. There are no buildings beside a distant whale, no trees rising beyond an unusual shape, and no fixed objects remaining close enough to establish proportion. The horizon stretches uninterrupted across every direction, encouraging the brain to estimate scale using incomplete information rather than dependable reference points. Light reflecting from the sea introduces another layer of complexity. Bright glare can erase fine details, while shifting patterns of ripples break continuous outlines into disconnected fragments. Rolling swells alternately conceal and reveal different portions of the same object, creating a sequence of brief impressions instead of one uninterrupted view. Rather than observing a complete form, the eye collects scattered visual moments that must later be assembled into something coherent. Under such conditions, certainty naturally becomes more difficult than confidence. The brain addresses this challenge through principles that usually serve everyday life remarkably well. Among them is the Gestalt principle of continuity, the tendency to connect interrupted shapes into one consistent object whenever separate pieces appear related. On open water, where several marine animals surface one after another along nearly the same path, that tendency becomes especially influential. Individual backs emerging in succession may be woven together into the outline of one remarkably long creature. The interpretation feels immediate because perception favors continuity over fragmentation whenever the available evidence permits both possibilities. Historical reports reveal how strongly environmental conditions contributed to these experiences. The officers aboard the Daedalus observed their mysterious animal beneath an overcast sky as changing weather approached during the late afternoon. Diffuse lighting softened boundaries and reduced contrast across the water. Witnesses at Gloucester, by comparison, repeatedly described calm seas illuminated by brilliant sunshine. Although those settings differed greatly, each introduced its own optical challenges. Bright reflections concealed detail in one case, while subdued light blended forms together in the other, demonstrating that contrasting conditions may produce equally persuasive visual distortions through different physical processes. Beyond optics and anatomy lies another influence that cannot be separated from perception itself. Expectation shapes interpretation before conscious reasoning even begins. By the 19th century, reports of sea serpents circulated widely through newspapers, books, and conversations among mariners. Sailors embarking upon long voyages often carried vivid descriptions of mysterious creatures already fixed in memory. When an unfamiliar shape appeared upon the horizon, the mind naturally compared new sensory information with existing mental patterns. Ambiguous observations, therefore, tended to settle into familiar narratives rather than entirely unfamiliar possibilities. This process does not suggest carelessness or dishonesty. It reflects the ordinary operation of a perceptual system that must constantly transform incomplete sensory information into meaningful experience. The sea, with its immense distances, shifting light, and absence of stable reference, places that system under unusual demands. Many legendary encounters emerged from the meeting of genuine marine life with the remarkable architecture of human perception, where biology, expectation, and the changing face of the ocean combined to produce experiences that observers recorded with complete sincerity and enduring conviction. Knowledge has often advanced through people willing to preserve uncertain observations instead of discarding them. Before laboratories, underwater cameras, and preserved museum collections transformed natural history, careful listeners performed a role nearly as important as careful explorers. They gathered reports from distant harbors, compared one account with another, and searched for recurring patterns that might reveal something genuine beneath the inconsistencies of memory. Among the most diligent of those collectors was a Norwegian bishop whose approach to extraordinary stories proved far more disciplined than later generations sometimes assumed. During 1752, Eric Pontoppidan, Bishop of Bergen, published The Natural History of Norway, an ambitious survey intended to describe the landscapes, animals, resources, and natural phenomena of Scandinavia. Rather than separating familiar creatures from remarkable ones, he placed them within the same broad effort to document the living world. Fish, birds, geological formations, and accounts of immense marine animals appeared together because all belonged to nature as he understood it. His purpose was not entertainment. It was the orderly collection of available evidence. Pontoppidan approached testimony with more caution than his reputation often suggests. He openly acknowledged that sailors occasionally exaggerated events witnessed during long voyages. Not every tale deserved equal confidence, and he said so plainly. Instead of accepting every dramatic report, he attempted to filter unreliable stories from those supported by repeated observation. Particular attention was given to descriptions supplied independently by multiple witnesses who operated in the same waters across extended periods. Consistency, rather than excitement, became one of his principal standards for deciding what merited inclusion. Among the creatures preserved within his work, none became more famous than the kraken. Pontoppidan described an enormous marine animal whose immense body could initially be mistaken for a chain of small islands rising from the sea. Mariners reported dangerous encounters as they unknowingly approached what appeared to be stable land before recognizing movement beneath the surface. Although later generations celebrated these passages as legendary storytelling, the descriptions possess details that invite a different interpretation when viewed through modern biological knowledge. Today, many historians and marine biologists regard Pontoppidan's kraken as an early attempt to describe encounters with giant squid, an unusually positioned squid near the surface, especially one displaying long feeding arms across calm water, could produce an outline unlike any familiar animal. Without preserved specimens for comparison, observers naturally interpreted such unfamiliar forms using the closest language available to them. Pontoppidan faithfully recorded those recurring descriptions without possessing the anatomical framework needed to identify the underlying species accurately. In that sense, his greatest limitation lay not within his method, but within the scientific tools available during his lifetime. Comparative anatomy remained in its infancy, leaving scholars with few reliable means of connecting fragmentary remains to living animals described by witnesses. Taxonomy had not yet matured into the systematic discipline that later generations would recognize. Faced with incomplete evidence, Pontoppidan relied upon careful comparison, cross-referencing, and critical selection, procedures that closely resemble the foundations of scientific investigation, even if some resulting conclusions eventually proved incorrect. The influence of the natural history of Norway extended well beyond Scandinavia. European naturalists cited the volume throughout much of the 18th century and continued referring to it into the 19th century. Its observations contributed to broader conversations about marine life, geography, and exploration. Only after taxonomy demanded preserved specimens as the principal standard of proof did many of Pontoppidans' extraordinary accounts become reclassified as folklore rather than natural history. The underlying reports remained unchanged, yet the rules governing acceptable evidence had evolved. History eventually returned unexpected support to one of his most famous entries. During 1873, the first confirmed giant squid specimen reached scientific study after being recovered near Newfoundland. The animal belonged to a species whose existence many earlier scholars had doubted despite centuries of testimony. Its discovery did not establish every detail contained within Pontoppidan's Kraken narrative, yet it demonstrated that an enormous deep-sea cephalopod had indeed inhabited the North Atlantic throughout the centuries when sailors described impossible encounters. His careful catalog therefore occupies a distinctive place in the history of science, reminding us that dependable methods can preserve genuine discoveries, even when available. Knowledge has not yet caught up with the evidence patiently gathered from the edge of the known world. Some stories become so vast that they can no longer be measured against the size of any ordinary animal. Instead, they begin to describe the landscape itself, giving shape to the uncertainty that surrounded the farthest horizons. Among the peoples of the North Atlantic, no image expressed that uncertainty more completely than Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, a being said to encircle the entire world while holding its own tail within its jaws. Certain Norse traditions even describe sailors mistaking its immense body for a chain of low islands before discovering that the apparent land possessed a life of its own. Although Jörmungandr belongs unmistakably to mythology, the experiences that nourished such imagery likely emerged from the daily reality of seafaring. Long voyages across cold northern waters exposed crews to marine animals unlike anything found in sheltered coastal inlets. A distant whale resting near the surface, or another enormous creature presenting only part of its body above the water, could easily interrupt the smooth horizon with a shape resembling rocky land. Before charts became complete and coastlines fully surveyed, the difference between an island and a living animal could briefly become uncertain. The image of an island that unexpectedly moves appears again and again across maritime traditions, separated by great distances and different languages. In 1001 Nights, Sinbad and his companions land upon what they believe is solid ground before discovering that the island is actually an immense whale. The Voyage of St. Brendan recounts Irish monks celebrating upon the back of Jasconius, an enormous sea beast mistaken for land. The medieval Physiologus, a widely copied collection of animal lore, likewise describes a gigantic marine creature whose broad back invites weary sailors to anchor before it descends beneath the waves. Each account differs in culture and setting, yet all preserve the same central experience: stable land transformed into unexpected life. Modern marine biology offers several plausible animals capable of inspiring such recurring narratives. A basking shark feeding near the surface sometimes swims with its broad back exposed, while its enormous mouth remains open to strain tiny organisms from the water. Under certain conditions, portions of its body may resemble a gently rounded reef extending just above the surface. Large baleen whales resting or surfacing in calm seas can produce a similarly deceptive profile, especially when only a section of the body remains visible from afar. Neither animal truly resembles an island at close range, yet distance, lighting, and limited perspective readily encourage broader interpretations. The geography surrounding Norse tradition provides another revealing detail. Stories placed sea serpents near the outer limits of the known world, around Iceland, Greenland, and the broad Atlantic beyond familiar settlements. Those northern waters support some of the largest marine animals on Earth, including immense baleen whales and the rare North Atlantic appearances of oarfish carried toward shallower regions. The location assigned to legendary serpents, therefore, reflects places where extraordinary encounters genuinely became more likely, not imaginary realms entirely detached from experience. Norse sailors themselves deserve careful consideration. They crossed open oceans with remarkable confidence centuries before many other European navigators ventured so far from established routes. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson reached the shores of North America through sustained voyages across the North Atlantic. Such achievements required exceptional knowledge of currents, weather, coastlines, and navigation. Their reports cannot reasonably be dismissed as the inventions of inexperienced travelers unfamiliar with the sea. Instead, they represent observations recorded by mariners whose lives depended upon recognizing the ocean with uncommon skill. Within Norse belief, Jörmungandr eventually assumed a role extending beyond natural history into cosmology. The serpent remained bound around the world until Ragnarok, when its release signaled the final collapse of the established order. Beneath that dramatic imagery rests a recognizable maritime truth. For generations living beside unpredictable northern seas, the greatest dangers often emerged beyond the edge of familiar knowledge, where storms, drifting ice, and immense marine life combined into one overwhelming frontier. The world serpent came to embody that boundary, not merely as an enormous creature, but as a symbol of the threshold where human understanding yielded to the vastness of the ocean itself. Autumn storms have a habit of delivering unexpected visitors onto familiar shores. After days beneath restless water, the sea sometimes returns fragments of its hidden world, transformed by currents, scavengers, and decay into forms that scarcely resemble the living creatures from which they came. Such moments have repeatedly challenged naturalists because the ocean does not always surrender its inhabitants in recognizable condition. One remarkable example unfolded along the coast of Scotland during the early 19th century, where an ordinary marine animal arrived wearing the appearance of something entirely unknown. On the 25th of September, 1808, powerful weather swept across the Orkney Islands. When the sea withdrew, an enormous carcass rested upon the shore of Stronsay. Farmer John Peace encountered it the following day and carefully recorded its dimensions. He estimated the body at roughly 55 feet in length, with a circumference of approximately 10 feet. Most puzzling of all were 3 pairs of projecting structures that observers variously described as paws or wings. Combined with the exceptional size of the remains, those features encouraged immediate speculation that the animal represented an undiscovered species rather than a familiar one. People who examined the carcass noticed additional characteristics that deepened the mystery. Around the neck region appeared a fringe resembling coarse bristles or a mane. The outer surface felt smooth when the hand moved from head toward tail, while the underlying structure possessed a resilient texture more suggestive of cartilage than solid bone. Individually, those observations seemed unusual. Together, they painted the portrait of a creature unlike any commonly recognized marine animal inhabiting northern waters. The remains soon attracted the attention of the Wernerian Natural History Society of Edinburgh. Members gathered testimony from witnesses and examined preserved portions of the specimen in hopes of determining its identity. Despite sincere investigation, they found no satisfactory match among the animals then known to science. Concluding that the evidence pointed toward an entirely new species, the Society bestowed the formal scientific name Halcydrus pontopidani, meaning Pontoppidan's seawater snake. The choice honored Eric Pontoppidan, whose careful collection of sea serpent reports had influenced natural history decades earlier. To those investigators, naming the animal represented the logical conclusion of their available evidence rather than an act of imagination. Scientific understanding, however, continued evolving after the excitement surrounding the discovery had faded. Anatomist Sir Everard Home examined cartilage samples together with surviving vertebrae in London and proposed a far less exotic explanation. In his judgment, the remains belonged not to an unknown serpent, but to a decomposing basking shark. Decades later, during 1849, Scottish professor John Goodser independently reached the same conclusion after further anatomical study. Their interpretation gradually gained acceptance as additional knowledge accumulated regarding shark anatomy and the dramatic changes produced by decomposition. Even today, 3 vertebrae from the Stronsay specimen remain preserved within the Royal Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, connecting the historical debate with surviving physical evidence. The transformation from recognizable shark into apparent monster follows a remarkably consistent biological process. As a basking shark decays, the lower jaw and large gill structures detach early, leaving the remaining skull elongated in appearance. Portions of the tail disappear, altering familiar proportions. Fibrous connective tissues become exposed around the neck, producing what resembles a rough mane. Fins erode into irregular appendages unlike those present in the living animal. Each stage removes ordinary features while emphasizing unfamiliar ones, creating a body that appears almost purpose-built to inspire extraordinary interpretations. The Stronsay discovery, therefore, illustrates something larger than a single historical misunderstanding. It demonstrates how genuine animals may cross the boundary into legend through natural chemistry acting upon flesh after death, especially when observers lack comparative anatomical knowledge. That lesson did not remain confined to the 19th century. 169 years later, the carcass recovered by the Japanese fishing vessel Zuio Maru inspired remarkably similar speculation. Before careful analysis, again identified the remains as a decomposed basking shark. Across separated generations, the same biological process produced nearly the same conclusion, revealing that the illusion belongs not to historical innocence, but to the enduring ability of the ocean to reshape familiar creatures into forms that challenge even experienced eyes. Discovery sometimes arrives wrapped in uncertainty rather than clarity. Even during an age of oceanographic research, laboratory analysis, and global communication, the sea still possesses the ability to present familiar animals in unfamiliar forms. One remarkable episode unfolded during the late 20th century, reminding scientists that modern technology had reduced many mysteries but had not eliminated the enduring challenge of interpreting what rises unexpectedly from deep water. On the 25th of April, 1977, the Japanese fishing trawler Zuio Maru was working roughly 30 miles east of Christchurch, New Zealand. Its nets descended to a depth of about 1,000 feet before returning with something none of the crew expected. Tangled among the catch lay the partially decomposed remains of an enormous marine animal. Crew member Michihiko Yano immediately recognized that the carcass deserved careful attention. Before further decisions were made, he photographed the specimen, collected tissue samples, and recorded detailed measurements that would later become central to one of the most discussed zoological investigations of the century. The captain nevertheless faced an immediate practical concern. A decaying carcass threatened to contaminate the valuable fish already aboard, and preserving the catch took priority over preserving the unknown animal. After the essential observations had been completed, the remains were returned to the sea. Fortunately, Yano's careful notes survived. He estimated the carcass at approximately 32 feet in length and an estimated weight of about 4,000 pounds. It possessed 4 substantial fins, a remarkably long neck, and what appeared to be a comparatively small head. Those proportions immediately recalled one of the most recognizable extinct marine reptiles in popular imagination. When the photographs reached Japan, public fascination expanded with remarkable speed. Newspapers reproduced the images, television programs debated their significance, and discussion soon spread beyond the country where the discovery had occurred. The Japanese Creationist Society declared that the remains represented a surviving plesiosaur. Even some respected scientists acknowledged that the photographs deserved careful examination before any conclusion could be reached. Public interest became so widespread that the Japanese government eventually issued a commemorative postage stamp depicting the mysterious creature, illustrating how thoroughly the discovery had entered contemporary culture. Excitement alone, however, could not determine biological identity. The decisive evidence rested within the tissue samples that Yano had preserved before the carcass disappeared beneath the waves. Japanese scientist Shigeru Kimura analyzed the remaining muscle fibers by examining the ratios of amino acids retained within the decomposed tissue. Unlike external appearance, biochemical composition changes far less dramatically through ordinary decay. The resulting measurements proved remarkably consistent with known basking shark tissue, while remaining fundamentally incompatible with reptilian anatomy, including that of plesiosaurs. The chemistry preserved within the muscles, therefore, identified the animal far more reliably than its altered outward form. Additional evidence emerged from the measurements recorded aboard the vessel. Although popular illustrations often emphasize the apparent neck, Yano's original dimensions revealed body proportions more consistent with a decomposing basking shark than with any extinct marine reptile. The tail remained longer than the neck, while the positions of the fins closely matched the anatomy expected after portions of a large shark had deteriorated. As investigators reconstructed the carcass using those measurements, the supposed prehistoric survivor gradually resolved into an entirely familiar species, transformed by predictable biological processes. One unexpected source of confusion arose from memory itself. Approximately 2 months after the event, Yano produced a sketch illustrating what he recalled seeing aboard the trawler. That drawing differed in subtle but important ways from the photographs captured on the day of discovery. Certain proportions shifted, the neck appeared more elongated, and the overall outline became increasingly reminiscent of a plesiosaur. Because many later discussions relied upon the sketch rather than the original photographs, those small differences strengthened an interpretation already encouraged by public expectation. The Zuio Maru incident demonstrated something more significant than the identification of a single carcass. It showed that the transformation undergone by decomposing basking sharks is neither rare nor confined to earlier centuries lacking scientific knowledge. The same natural process had now misled natural history societies, attracted serious scientific debate, influenced a national government, and captivated international news organizations within living memory. Across generations separated by advances in biology, photography, and chemistry, The ocean continued to reveal how convincingly an ordinary animal can wear the appearance of something that seems impossible. Some discoveries arrive not through direct encounter, but through traces carried by another hunter. The ocean occasionally reveals one hidden life by placing it inside the remains of another, allowing predators to become unexpected collectors for science. Such a moment unfolded in the icy waters surrounding Antarctica, where the stomach of a whale preserved evidence for an animal that no naturalist had ever formally recognized, despite countless generations spent exploring the seas. During 1925, researchers examining the stomach contents of a sperm whale recovered two enormous tentacles, unlike those of any squid previously described. They belonged to a species eventually named Mesinicoteuthis hamiltoni, the colossal squid. Even those incomplete remains revealed important differences. The tentacles appeared thicker and more powerfully built than those of the already remarkable giant squid. Their proportions suggested an animal designed not for graceful length alone, but for extraordinary strength in the crushing darkness of the deep Southern Ocean. As additional specimens slowly accumulated across the following decades, another surprise emerged. The colossal squid was not simply a larger version of its famous relative. Its body proved shorter and considerably more massive, carrying far greater bulk within a more compact form. Most striking of all were the structures lining its feeding arms and tentacles. Instead of relying primarily upon rings of suckers, the colossal squid possessed rotating hooks edged like sharpened blades. Those hooks did more than grip struggling prey. Their shape indicates an ability to slash and anchor simultaneously, making escape from such an embrace extraordinarily difficult for fish or other squid encountered in the darkness. Modern estimates suggest that mature females may reach approximately 46 feet in total length, while weighing as much as 1,100 pounds. Although those dimensions inspire immediate attention, another feature surpasses even its remarkable size. The eyes of the colossal squid may measure as much as 16 inches across, larger than the confirmed eyes of any animal known to have lived upon Earth. Such immense organs gather the faintest available light within deep water, while also detecting subtle disturbances created by approaching predators. In an environment where sunlight never penetrates, vision depends less upon brightness than upon extraordinary sensitivity. The habitat occupied by this elusive cephalopod explains why direct encounters remain exceptionally uncommon. Colossal squid inhabit the Southern Ocean at depths ranging from roughly 3,000 feet to 7,000 feet below the surface. Those waters remain among the least accessible regions on the planet, where crushing pressure, perpetual darkness, and extreme cold discourage routine exploration. Human visitors spend only brief moments there, using specialized equipment, while the squid passes its entire life within that hidden realm. Even after a full century of scientific awareness, remarkably little is understood about its ordinary behavior. Researchers possess only a small number of complete specimens, many recovered after becoming prey for sperm whales. Observations of living individuals remain exceedingly scarce, leaving questions about hunting strategies, reproduction, growth, and lifespan only partially answered. The animal has become scientifically recognized without ever becoming scientifically familiar, an unusual circumstance for one of the largest invertebrates on the planet. Its existence gently challenges an assumption that often accompanies discussions of legendary sea creatures. Large animals are frequently imagined to be impossible to overlook, leading to the belief that every enormous marine species must already have been cataloged long ago. The colossal squid demonstrates otherwise. An animal exceeding the size of the giant squid, equipped with uniquely specialized hooks and extraordinary eyes, remained entirely unknown to science until the 20th century, despite inhabiting Earth's oceans throughout human history. Unlike the creatures described in old serpent traditions, the colossal squid rarely approaches the surface. Living thousands of feet beneath the waves, it offers almost no opportunity for passing sailors to mistake it for an unfamiliar monster. Yet its discovery carries an important lesson of its own. For many centuries, mariners spoke of immense tentacled beings inhabiting distant seas, long before biology possessed the means to investigate such claims thoroughly. Nearly 1,700 years passed between those early Kraken traditions and the formal recognition of the colossal squid. The deep ocean, therefore, continues to remind us that the boundaries of knowledge do not always coincide with the boundaries of life itself, and that even today, the largest inhabitants of the sea may remain known only through the briefest glimpses they leave behind. Across the open ocean, enormous animals often reveal themselves only in fragments. A curved back appears for a few moments, then disappears beneath the water. Another rises farther along the same line. A burst of mist drifts above the waves before fading into the air. From nearby, each movement belongs to an individual whale. Viewed from a distant vessel with an uninterrupted horizon and shifting seas, those separate moments can merge into the impression of one immense creature traveling just beneath the surface. Among the most impressive participants in this illusion are sperm whales, the largest toothed predators on Earth. Mature males may reach approximately 67 feet in length, yet even such remarkable size tells only part of the story. Sperm whales commonly travel in groups, and when they surface to breathe, they do not always emerge simultaneously. One animal may rise, exhale, and descend while another surfaces a short distance away only moments later. A third follows along the same general path, creating a procession of rounded backs advancing across the sea. From the deck of a sailing ship, positioned roughly 300 to 500 yards away, that sequence becomes surprisingly difficult to interpret. The observer does not receive one uninterrupted view, but a succession of partial glimpses. Each whale remains visible briefly before slipping beneath the surface, while the next emerges beyond it. The mind naturally links those separate appearances into a continuous form. 5 large whales surfacing in staggered order may therefore resemble one elongated body marked by a series of rounded humps extending far beyond the length of any individual animal. Occasional columns of breath rising into the air only strengthen the impression that something immense continues moving beneath the waves. Other whale species introduce different forms of ambiguity. Among the strongest modern explanations proposed for the famous observation aboard the Daedalus is the sei whale. Reaching lengths of approximately 60 feet, this swift baleen whale sometimes feeds close to the surface, while raising the upper portion of its head above the water. During such behavior, the baleen plates hanging inside the mouth may appear as coarse fringes when viewed under subdued lighting. From a distance of roughly 200 yards across unsettled water, those dark structures can resemble a flowing mane rather than feeding equipment belonging to a whale. The overall outline of a feeding sei whale also aligns remarkably well with several historical descriptions. While the head remains elevated, the dorsal fin stands much farther back along the body, separated from the front by a broad expanse of back. To an observer lacking a complete view beneath the surface, those features can appear as distinct anatomical regions rather than parts of the same familiar animal. The resulting silhouette possesses a long forward section, an apparent mane, and a second raised hump farther behind, characteristics that have repeatedly appeared within historical reports of mysterious marine creatures. Real whales also bear the marks of difficult lives. Encounters with killer whales may leave deep scars across the skin, remove portions of fins, or permanently alter the profile of the back. Old injuries heal into irregular shapes, unlike those illustrated in natural history books. Even experienced observers occasionally hesitate when confronted with such unusual individuals because damaged anatomy no longer matches familiar expectations. An already challenging identification becomes even more uncertain when viewed through spray, distance, and changing light. Patterns preserved within historical records offer another revealing comparison. During the 19th century, reports of sea serpents across the North Atlantic and South Atlantic tended to increase during seasons when migrating whales also became especially abundant within those same latitudes. The overlap does not prove that every serpent report described a whale, yet it establishes a meaningful geographical and seasonal relationship between extraordinary sightings and the movements of some of the largest animals inhabiting the ocean. Earlier centuries provide additional context for understanding those encounters. During the 16th and 17th centuries, whales themselves remained imperfectly understood by European scholars. Medieval systems of natural classification often grouped immense marine animals among monsters simply because they seemed unfamiliar and exceptional. Fast-moving species such as the sei whale rarely stranded upon shore, leaving naturalists with few opportunities to examine complete specimens. Sailors therefore encountered living giants long before science possessed dependable categories for them, allowing ordinary whales, seen under extraordinary conditions, to become enduring figures within the long history of sea serpents. Knowledge sometimes advances by overturning assumptions that seemed perfectly reasonable. For generations, naturalists imagined that ribbon-shaped fishes traveled through the sea in the same horizontal posture used by nearly every other large fish. That expectation appeared so obvious it attracted little debate. Only during the 21st century, when remotely operated underwater vehicles finally recorded living oarfish in their natural environment, did an astonishing behavior emerge from the darkness. Instead of remaining level, these remarkable animals were observed drifting with their heads pointed upward, while the rest of the body extended almost perfectly vertical beneath them. No sailor from earlier centuries could have invented that posture through guesswork. It remained entirely unknown until modern cameras descended into regions beyond ordinary human reach. Yet, the newly documented behavior unexpectedly illuminated descriptions preserved across centuries of maritime testimony. A scientific discovery had not confirmed a legendary creature. Instead, it explained why so many honest observers had described an animal that seemed impossible according to the assumptions of their own time. When an oarfish approaches the surface while maintaining its vertical orientation, only a small portion of the animal becomes visible above the water. The head emerges first, accompanied by the upper section of the long dorsal fin that begins at the crown. Almost the entire body remains concealed beneath the surface, descending into water that rapidly absorbs detail and depth. An observer aboard a passing vessel therefore sees no complete outline. The visible portion appears disconnected from the hidden length extending below, inviting the natural impression that an enormous creature continues far into the darkness. Many historical accounts describe precisely that arrangement. Witnesses frequently reported a head projecting above the waves, while the remainder of the animal vanished beneath the surface beyond the reach of sight. Rather than claiming they had measured an impossible body, many simply acknowledged that the visible portion disappeared downward into water where its full extent could not be followed. Without knowledge of the oarfish's vertical posture, it seemed reasonable to imagine that the unseen length continued horizontally beneath the surface instead of descending almost straight downward. The appearance of the dorsal fin strengthens this remarkable correspondence. Along the back of an oarfish runs a vivid red crest, beginning immediately above the head and continuing nearly the entire length of the body. During a vertical ascent, only the upper section of that crest rises into view. Against gray seas or subdued light, those first few feet resemble a striking scarlet mane flowing backward from the crown. Historical descriptions of sea serpents crowned with crimson or reddish crests therefore become easier to understand when viewed through the behavior revealed by modern observation rather than through the expectations held by earlier generations. Color and light introduce another subtle complication. The body of the oarfish possesses a brilliant silver surface that reflects surrounding illumination, almost like polished metal. Upon moving water, such reflections constantly change with the angle of waves, clouds, and the observer's position. Human vision depends heavily upon stable contrast to estimate size and shape. Mirror-like surfaces deny that stability, causing outlines to dissolve into shifting flashes that merge with the sea itself. The visible head may remain distinct while the reflective body seems to disappear despite remaining only a short distance beneath the surface. Surface appearances by oarfish are themselves unusual events. Healthy individuals spend most of their lives in deep water, where they remain beyond ordinary observation. Those reaching shallow depths often appear injured, weakened, or otherwise distressed. Their movements become irregular, including rolling, twisting, vigorous thrashing, or even partial beaching along coastlines. Such behavior differs dramatically from the smooth swimming expected of familiar fish. To an observer encountering the animal without any previous knowledge, the combination of unusual posture, concealed body, vivid crest, and erratic motion naturally suggests a creature unlike anything previously seen. What makes this evidence especially compelling is its direction of discovery. Ancient witnesses did not shape their stories to resemble modern biology. Instead, modern biology uncovered a behavior that unexpectedly matched details already resting within old accounts. The vertical ascent of the oarfish demonstrates that careful scientific observation can sometimes illuminate forgotten testimony, revealing that certain descriptions, once dismissed as extravagant, may have preserved accurate glimpses of a real animal behaving in a way that nobody, until very recently, realized was even possible. Maps can preserve more than coastlines. When enough observations accumulate across centuries, they begin to reveal patterns that no single voyage could ever recognize. A lone encounter may remain an isolated curiosity, yet hundreds of independent reports scattered across different generations invite another kind of investigation, one concerned less with individual stories than with the geography connecting them. Belgian zoologist Bernard Heuvelmans devoted years to assembling such a record. Drawing upon reports published between 1639 and 1966, he collected 587 accounts describing unusual marine animals. Rather than accepting every narrative without examination, he discarded obvious hoaxes, contradictory descriptions, and sources lacking sufficient detail. After that careful filtering, 358 reports remained that he regarded as credible enough for serious comparison. Studying those surviving cases together, he proposed that they did not describe one universal sea serpent, but at least 9 recurring forms, distinguished by consistent body shape, movement, and appearance. Whether one accepts his conclusions or not, the underlying method represented an important shift. Instead of searching for a single legendary creature, Heuvelmans searched for statistical regularities. Repeated descriptions occurring across distant places suggested that witnesses might have encountered different animals under similar conditions. The reports became less like folklore collected for entertainment and more like scattered field observations awaiting careful organization. Their distribution across the oceans proved especially intriguing. Sightings in the North Atlantic did not appear evenly across every stretch of water. Many clustered along routes now recognized as seasonal pathways used by large baleen whales, wandering oarfish, and the deep living prey pursued by giant squid. These regions contain productive marine ecosystems where changing currents concentrate enormous quantities of life. Whenever food becomes abundant, predators of every size naturally gather, increasing the likelihood that sailors would encounter unfamiliar animals rather than empty horizons. The Pacific displayed a related pattern shaped by different oceanography. Numerous reports accumulated near powerful upwelling systems where nutrient-rich water rises from great depth toward the surface. Those rising currents sustain dense food webs, while occasionally carrying unusual deep-water organisms into shallower layers. Animals rarely observed under ordinary circumstances, therefore become temporarily accessible to fishing vessels and passing ships, creating opportunities for encounters that might otherwise never occur. Along the coast of New England, seasonal timing reveals another remarkable correspondence. During the 19th century, reports from the waters surrounding Cape Ann reached their greatest frequency between July and September. Modern marine ecology recognizes those same months as the period when vast schools of herring gather for summer feeding. Such concentrations attract dolphins traveling in coordinated groups, as well as large predatory whales pursuing abundant prey unusually close to shore. An increase in extraordinary sightings during those weeks therefore follows the seasonal movement of genuine marine life rather than an arbitrary point upon the calendar. The Southern Hemisphere presents a similar relationship. Reports, including the famous observation from the Daedalus, cluster along the broad South Atlantic corridor extending between the Cape of Good Hope and St. Helena. Oceanographers recognize this region as one of the world's most productive open water environments, supporting migrations of sei whales, sperm whales, and countless other species following rich feeding opportunities. A heavily traveled shipping route passing through biologically abundant waters naturally increases the number of unusual observations recorded within surviving logbooks. Taken together, these geographical relationships suggest something important about the historical record. If sea serpent stories arose entirely from imagination without influence from the natural world, their distribution might reasonably be expected to appear more random. Instead, many reports concentrate where remarkable marine animals genuinely occur with greater frequency. The pattern does not establish the existence of unknown species, yet it demonstrates that eyewitnesses repeatedly described extraordinary creatures in places where extraordinary encounters were objectively more likely. Heuvelmans ultimately argued that at least some reports preserved evidence for animals still unknown to science. Many researchers remain unconvinced by that conclusion, preferring explanations rooted in recognized species and human perception. Even so, skeptical scholars generally acknowledge that the geographical and seasonal structure within the sightings deserves attention. Fabricated stories seldom arrange themselves so consistently around migration corridors, productive feeding grounds, and recurring ecological rhythms. In that enduring pattern, The oceans leave behind another subtle trace of the living world that inspired generations of careful observers. Scientific debates are often remembered through discoveries, yet they are equally shaped by those who insisted that certain discoveries would never come. During the 19th century, few naturalists possessed greater influence than Richard Owen, whose authority extended across museums, anatomy, and public science throughout Victorian Britain. His opinions carried unusual weight, and when the subject of sea serpents arose, he became the era's most determined and recognizable skeptic. Owen's reputation rested upon formidable achievements. During 1842, he introduced the scientific term dinosaur, bringing together several extinct reptiles within a single conceptual framework that transformed paleontology. His careful anatomical comparisons earned widespread respect, making him a trusted interpreter of unfamiliar animals. As reports of sea serpents multiplied, newspapers increasingly sought his judgment. Repeatedly and confidently, he argued that extraordinary sightings reflected ordinary creatures observed under difficult conditions rather than unknown giants inhabiting the sea. The persistence of that position eventually earned him the informal nickname of the Sea Serpent Killer. His reasoning deserves careful attention because it differed from simple dismissal. Owen rarely claimed that eyewitnesses deliberately invented their stories. Instead, he believed that sincere observers lacking specialized zoological knowledge could systematically mistake seals, whales, sharks, and long ribbon-shaped fishes for impossible animals. Distance, shifting water, uncertain lighting, and expectations inherited from popular culture combined, in his view, to transform familiar marine life into legendary creatures. The error belonged to perception rather than honesty. That philosophy received its most famous test after the celebrated observation aboard the Daedalus. Owen responded swiftly through a public letter published in the Illustrated London News. There he proposed that Captain Peter McQuay and his officers had encountered an elephant seal rather than an unknown serpent. Owen supported his conclusion with anatomical comparisons, arguing that several reported features could be reconciled with the appearance of a large seal viewed under imperfect conditions. He even invited the captain to reconsider his interpretation in light of those biological arguments. Captain McQuay answered with equal courtesy and remarkable confidence. He thanked Owen for his interest while firmly maintaining that neither he nor his experienced officers had mistaken an elephant seal for the animal they observed. The exchange became one of the defining scientific conversations surrounding the sea serpent controversy because it revealed two disciplined observers applying different forms of expertise. Owen trusted comparative anatomy above eyewitness testimony. McQuay trusted prolonged observation made by trained naval officers accustomed to identifying unfamiliar objects across open water. Neither participant questioned the integrity of the other, yet neither abandoned his position. Owen's influence gradually reshaped scientific attitudes. Following the events of 1848, reports of sea serpents increasingly migrated from the pages of zoological investigation into discussions of folklore and maritime tradition. Researchers demanded stronger evidence before entertaining extraordinary claims. Preserved specimens, complete skeletons, and verifiable anatomical material became the expected standard. From an epistemological perspective, that higher threshold represented an understandable safeguard against error, encouraging science to rely upon physical evidence rather than compelling stories alone. Even so, history introduced an unexpected irony. Some remarkable marine animals, whose existence remained uncertain during Owen's lifetime, eventually entered accepted zoology. the giant squid achieved undeniable confirmation during 1873 after tangible specimens reached scientific study. Living oarfish were photographed during the early years of the 21st century, revealing appearances and behaviors scarcely imagined by earlier observers. Soon afterward, the giant squid itself was successfully filmed within its natural habitat after generations of remaining almost entirely beyond direct observation. Owen proved largely correct in rejecting the traditional sea serpent as a single unknown monster, yet the ocean continued, revealing extraordinary creatures that earlier skepticism had underestimated. His campaign therefore illuminates more than one historical disagreement. It demonstrates how scientific communities classify entire categories of claims. Once a particular subject becomes associated with folklore rather than evidence, convincing researchers requires an increasingly demanding standard of proof. Marine animals present an especially difficult challenge because physical specimens depend upon unpredictable strandings, accidental capture, or rare opportunities for observation beneath immense depths. Those conditions cannot be summoned whenever curiosity demands. Between careful skepticism and genuine discovery stretches a narrow passage where science advances most steadily by remaining willing to question remarkable claims without closing the door upon remarkable evidence when it finally arrives. Darkness does not erase life. It reshapes it. Far below the reach of sunlight, where the ocean becomes an endless midnight, every successful animal carries adaptations that seem astonishing only because they evolved beyond ordinary human experience. Features that appear exaggerated from the surface become practical necessities beneath thousands of feet of water, where survival depends upon detecting the faintest signal before another hunter detects you first. Among the most remarkable examples is the giant squid. Its largest confirmed eyes measure approximately 11 inches across, making them the biggest eyes possessed by any living animal. Such immense organs did not evolve to admire distant scenery or gather abundant sunlight. They exist for a far more demanding purpose. At depths beyond 1,000 feet, where daylight has vanished, sperm whales pursuing squid disturb countless small organisms capable of producing brief flashes of bioluminescence. An enormous eye can recognize those distant glimmers, allowing the squid to detect an approaching predator while there is still time to flee. Seen from the deck of a vessel after an unlikely ascent toward the surface, such an eye would possess an appearance unlike anything familiar to generations of sailors. Attached to an animal approaching 40 feet in total length, the pale circular disc would emerge from dark water with startling clarity. Without knowledge of deep-sea anatomy, an observer could scarcely imagine why any living creature required an eye so immense. It would seem less like an ordinary fish, and more like something belonging to an entirely different world concealed beneath the waves. For many years, however, the giant squid itself remained frustratingly elusive. Long before complete specimens became available for detailed examination, researchers relied upon a much smaller structure to estimate its abundance. Hidden within the center of the animal's ring of arms lies a powerful beak resembling that of a parrot. Unlike the surrounding soft tissues, the beak resists decay remarkably well. Sperm whales routinely consume giant squid, digesting almost every part except this durable mouthpiece. As scientists examined whale stomach contents, they discovered dozens, and sometimes even hundreds, of preserved squid beaks accumulated within individual whales. Those collections revealed that giant squid were far more common than direct observation alone had ever suggested. The arms themselves provide another remarkable record of encounters hidden beneath the sea. living giant squid possess rows of powerful suckers, each bordered by hardened rings lined with fine serrations. During struggles with sperm whales, those suckers grip tightly against thick skin, leaving circular wounds that remain visible long after the encounter has ended. Researchers regularly document these distinctive scars upon living whales, preserving evidence of battles almost never witnessed directly by human eyes. The colossal squid carries this design even further by replacing many suckers with rotating hooks capable of securing prey with exceptional force. Both species, therefore, leave recognizable patterns upon the bodies of the predators pursuing them. Historical accounts occasionally mentioned whales bearing strange circular injuries attributed to mysterious sea monsters. Modern marine biology now recognizes that many such marks correspond closely with the scars produced during encounters between whales and enormous squid. Instead of mythical combat, those wounds preserve the ordinary yet extraordinary struggles occurring routinely within deep water beyond human observation. Every feature of the giant squid reflects the demands imposed by its environment. Massive eyes gather precious information where light scarcely exists. Flexible arms extend reach without sacrificing maneuverability. Powerful muscles propel rapid bursts of movement through cold water. None of these characteristics represents unnecessary extravagance. Each serves as a carefully refined solution to conditions that differ profoundly from those experienced near the surface. The resulting animal appears fantastic only because its world follows different biological rules. That hidden reality finally became visible during the early years of the 21st century. In 2004, researchers succeeded in photographing a living giant squid at a depth of approximately 3,000 feet in the Pacific Ocean. The images overturned long-held assumptions. Rather than drifting passively through darkness, the squid approached bait with remarkable speed and determination, covering roughly 20 feet in an energetic attack. The photographs revealed an active predator fully capable of decisive movement, bearing a presence that echoed many old descriptions of powerful creatures rising unexpectedly from the sea. What once seemed exaggerated gradually became recognizable as the ordinary behavior of an extraordinary animal shaped by the deepest waters on Earth. The ocean presents the eyes with only fragments. A curve interrupted by waves, a distant movement crossing uneven water, a fleeting outline glimpsed beneath changing light. Each arrives incomplete before disappearing again. The remarkable achievement belongs not to the eyes themselves, but to the brain, which assembles those scattered pieces into a coherent picture almost instantly. Human perception is therefore not a passive recording of the world. It is an active construction shaped by biology, experience, and expectation. Every second, the eyes deliver an immense stream of sensory information to the nervous system. Researchers estimate that this incoming flow contains roughly 10 million bits of visual data each second. Only about 40 bits ultimately reach conscious awareness. Everything beyond that narrow window is filtered, organized, and interpreted automatically long before deliberate thought begins. The visual cortex continually predicts what exists beyond incomplete evidence, selecting patterns that appear most probable according to previous experience. This process explains why ordinary perception functions so efficiently in daily life. A familiar face remains recognizable despite changing expressions and shadows. Words can often be understood even when several letters appear out of order. Within a crowded gathering, an individual may immediately recognize the sound of a familiar voice despite countless competing noises. The brain fills missing information with extraordinary speed because waiting for complete certainty would make survival far more difficult. Prediction is not an occasional shortcut. It is the foundation upon which ordinary perception depends. The same remarkable ability becomes especially important whenever sensory information grows uncertain. Open water provides exactly those conditions. Distance compresses scale. Reflections obscure outlines. Waves repeatedly interrupt visibility. An unfamiliar object appears only briefly before changing shape again. Faced with incomplete evidence, the brain searches for the interpretation requiring the fewest adjustments to existing expectations. Rather than evaluating every possible explanation equally, it naturally favors patterns already available within memory and culture. Modern neuroscience describes this framework as predictive processing. According to this understanding, the brain continuously generates expectations about the external world before incoming information fully arrives. Sensory evidence then modifies those predictions only when it differs strongly enough to demand revision. Most perception, therefore, proceeds from the top downward rather than entirely from the bottom upward. A form that agrees reasonably well with an anticipated object will often be recognized as that object even while important details remain hidden from view. Historical encounters at sea illustrate how such prediction could influence sincere observation. A sailor who had grown up hearing stories of serpents inhabiting distant oceans did not approach every unfamiliar silhouette with an empty mind. Cultural knowledge already supplied possible interpretations before the encounter began. When an unusual whale, an injured basking shark, an ascending oarfish, or another unfamiliar marine animal appeared under ambiguous conditions, the available vocabulary of sea serpents offered an immediately recognizable framework through which the experience could be understood and later described. This interaction between expectation and observation also appears within the historical record itself. During 1752, Erik Pontoppidan published his influential collection of Norwegian sea serpent accounts. Reports increased noticeably during the following decade, suggesting that wider public awareness encouraged additional recognition and reporting of similar experiences. A comparable pattern emerged after the widely circulated Gloucester observations of 1817. Later decades produced renewed clusters of reports, including approximately 12 during 1839, 9 during 1875, and 13 during 1886. Each period of extensive newspaper attention was followed by additional observations concentrated within regions where the subject already occupied public imagination. Such patterns need not imply deliberate invention. Instead, they reveal how genuine encounters become shaped by the language available to describe them. Witnesses observing real whales, giant squid, oarfish, dolphins, or decomposing sharks naturally reached for familiar ideas when confronted with unfamiliar appearances. As those descriptions entered newspapers and books, they in turn influenced future observers facing equally ambiguous scenes. The cycle reinforced itself without requiring dishonesty from the people participating within it. Viewed through this perspective, the long history of sea serpents becomes neither a chronicle of universal deception nor a catalogue of impossible creatures. It becomes a meeting place where authentic marine life, imperfect observation, cultural memory, and the remarkable predictive abilities of the human brain combined to produce stories that reflected both the living ocean and the equally fascinating workings of the mind that sought to understand it. Legends sometimes refuse to remain confined within old books. Even after photography, marine biology, and modern navigation transformed humanity's relationship with the sea. Certain coastlines continued producing reports that seemed strangely familiar. Along the shores surrounding Vancouver Island and the rugged coast of British Columbia, witnesses throughout the 20th century and into the present day repeatedly described an animal that appeared to belong more naturally beside the chronicles of earlier sailors than within the modern scientific age. Local tradition eventually gave it a name derived from Cadborough Bay near Victoria, Cadborosaurus wilsey, though many people simply came to know it as Caddy. Unlike many isolated mysteries, these reports accumulated over decades with remarkable consistency. Independent observers repeatedly described a creature possessing a long neck, supporting a head, often compared to that of a horse. Behind the neck stretched a body marked by rounded humps or a serrated profile rising above the surface. Flippers appeared near the front rather than the middle of the body, while the tail was commonly portrayed as broad, flattened, or ending in a fluke. Individual details varied from witness to witness, yet the overall form remained surprisingly stable despite the passage of more than a century. One event became especially influential during 1937. At the Naden Harbor whaling station near the Queen Charlotte Islands, workers reportedly recovered an unusual carcass from the stomach of a sperm whale. Photographs taken before the remains disappeared showed an elongated animal bearing fins together with what appeared to be a distinct neck and head, unlike any immediately recognizable marine species. Unfortunately, the specimen itself was never preserved. Without physical material available for later examination, researchers could only study the surviving photographs and the testimony accompanying them, leaving the most valuable evidence permanently beyond direct scientific analysis. Interest in the accumulated sightings persisted long after the original event faded from newspaper headlines. During 1994, marine biologist Paul LeBlanc and oceanographer John Seibert undertook a formal examination of the Cadborosaurus record. Rather than focusing upon a handful of dramatic encounters, they evaluated the broader collection of independent reports gathered across many years. Their analysis emphasized that the repeated similarities appeared difficult to explain through random combinations of unrelated mistakes. Although they stopped well short of declaring the mystery solved, they suggested that the evidence remained compatible with the existence of an unknown large marine animal deserving continued attention. Other researchers reached more cautious conclusions while proposing familiar candidates. The coastal waters of the Pacific Northwest support impressive wildlife capable of producing unusual impressions under challenging viewing conditions. Stellar sea lions may exceed 11 feet in length and occasionally adopt postures unfamiliar to casual observers. Pacific sleeper sharks move with deliberate, unhurried motions while inhabiting depths rarely visited by recreational boats. Giant Pacific octopuses possess flexible bodies capable of generating unusual silhouettes whenever arms and mantle briefly appear above the surface. Each explanation accounts for certain observations while leaving other recurring details unresolved. The persistent description of a lengthy neck remains particularly challenging. Sea lions possess mobile heads, but lack an elongated neck extending prominently above the water. Sleeper sharks exhibit entirely different body proportions. Octopuses display extraordinary flexibility, yet they do not consistently resemble the horse-headed profile so frequently described across independent accounts. None of these known animals reproduces every reported feature simultaneously, even though each may plausibly explain individual sightings occurring under particular circumstances. That uncertainty distinguishes the Cadborosaurus record from many earlier sea serpent traditions. The surrounding coastline has been explored extensively by commercial vessels, fishing communities, scientific expeditions, and recreational boaters. Modern observers often carry cameras, binoculars, and detailed field guides unavailable to earlier generations. Even within this environment of improved knowledge, reports continue to appear from time to time, including observations made by experienced mariners accustomed to recognizing the region's ordinary wildlife. The Cadborosaurus case, therefore, neither establishes the existence of an undiscovered marine species, nor disappears through any single familiar explanation. Instead, it demonstrates that the broader sea serpent phenomenon did not conclude with the 19th century. Modern oceans, despite centuries of careful exploration, still produce encounters that resist immediate classification. Whether those moments ultimately reveal overlooked behaviors of known animals, uncommon combinations of natural circumstances, or something not yet fully recognized, they preserve the enduring conversation between careful observation and the vast, still unfolding complexity of the living sea. Professional observation carries its own distinctive rhythm. A trained naturalist learns to separate description from conclusion, recording proportions before names, movement before interpretation. Such habits do not guarantee perfect accuracy, yet they create a careful discipline that differs from casual recollection. Among the many accounts gathered across the long history of unusual marine encounters, a small number attract lasting attention not because the reported creature appears more extraordinary, but because the observers themselves devoted their lives to studying the natural world. One such encounter unfolded during the 7th of December, 1905. The yacht Valhalla sailed through the North Atlantic approximately 15 miles from the Brazilian coast when those aboard noticed an unfamiliar animal at the surface. Unlike many fleeting glimpses lasting only moments, this observation continued for several minutes, allowing sustained attention from experienced eyes rather than hurried impressions formed during surprise. Among the witnesses stood Edward George Brodie Meade Waldo, a respected zoologist and fellow of the Zoological Society of London. Also present was Michael John Nicol, an accomplished ornithologist whose published scientific papers had earned recognition among fellow researchers. Neither man possessed a reputation for sensational stories or romantic speculation. Their professional work demanded patient observation, careful comparison, and accurate documentation. After the voyage, both produced written accounts describing what they believed they had seen, providing later investigators with unusually detailed records. Meade Waldo described a prominent dorsal structure rising roughly 6 feet above the water before any other visible part of the animal appeared. Behind that feature, he observed what seemed to be a neck approximately 6 feet in length, supporting a head that reminded him of a turtle. Nicol independently recorded remarkably similar proportions and emphasized that the neck remained distinct from the body while projecting above the surface. Their descriptions agreed upon the essential outline, despite being prepared separately rather than copied from one another. Those details have resisted comfortable classification for more than a century. Many marine biologists favor explanations involving known species observed under unusual circumstances, an approach supported by numerous earlier examples throughout this journey. Even here, however, each proposed identification encounters stubborn difficulties when compared carefully with the surviving testimony. An oarfish remains among the strongest candidates because modern observations have confirmed behaviors once considered improbable. Its elongated body can assume unusual positions near the surface, and portions of the animal may appear disconnected when much of its length remains concealed beneath the water. Yet, current understanding of oarfish anatomy does not readily account for a dorsal feature approaching the reported height, together with a separate neck held prominently above the surface. The observed proportions resist an uncomplicated match. Other suggestions have included an enormous squid reaching shallow water. Giant squid possess dimensions capable of surprising even experienced observers, and unusual postures during illness or injury might produce unfamiliar outlines. Nevertheless, squid anatomy lacks a true neck corresponding to the feature consistently described by both naturalists. Flexible arms and mantle cannot easily reproduce the specific arrangement recorded within their independent accounts. What gives the Valhalla observation enduring significance is therefore not merely the animal itself, but the quality of the witnesses. Previous generations of sailors often approached unfamiliar seas carrying inherited stories that could influence interpretation. Meade Waldo and Nicole belonged instead to a community trained to recognize variation among living organisms through systematic study. Their profession encouraged restraint rather than embellishment, and both men understood that extraordinary claims invited careful scrutiny from knowledgeable colleagues. Training, of course, does not eliminate every limitation imposed by distance, perspective, or changing conditions upon open water. Even accomplished observers remain vulnerable to incomplete information whenever only portions of an animal become visible. Science recognizes that expertise improves reliability without granting perfect certainty. The value of the Valhalla case rests precisely within that balanced understanding. It demonstrates how ambiguity can survive even when careful observation replaces casual storytelling. More than a century later, the encounter continues occupying a distinctive place within discussions of marine mysteries. The credentials of the witnesses inspire confidence, while the surviving descriptions remain sufficiently specific to encourage detailed analysis. At the same time, no familiar animal fits every reported characteristic without leaving meaningful inconsistencies behind. The result is neither compelling proof of an undiscovered species nor an account easily absorbed into a single conventional explanation. Instead, it stands as a measured reminder that the living ocean occasionally presents observations whose full meaning remains suspended between confident identification and enduring uncertainty. Discovery at sea rarely arrives as a dramatic revelation. More often, it begins with an unexpected net, a stranded body upon a distant shoreline, or an unfamiliar shape preserved long enough for careful study. The ocean has repeatedly demonstrated that even large animals can exist beyond scientific recognition for astonishing lengths of time, not because they are mythical, but because their world overlaps with ours only on rare occasions. One striking example is Bathysaurus ferox, a deep-water lizardfish whose formidable mouth is lined with teeth across almost every available surface. Although it appears unlike the fishes familiar to most people, this predator escaped scientific recognition until the 20th century. Living far below ordinary human activity, it spent countless generations occupying an environment visited only rarely by researchers. Its unusual appearance reminds us that evolution operating in darkness often produces anatomies that seem almost imagined when viewed for the first time. An even more dramatic case emerged during 1976 near the Hawaiian Islands. A massive shark measuring up to 18 feet in length became entangled in the anchor of a United States Navy vessel. Until that accidental encounter, no scientist had recognized the existence of what would become known as the megamouth shark. Despite its impressive size, it had remained entirely unknown because it inhabited deep offshore waters and surfaced only infrequently. The discovery overturned the comforting assumption that every large marine animal had already entered the scientific record. The history of the giant squid follows a similarly patient timeline. Formally described during 1857, it nevertheless resisted direct observation in its natural environment for another 147 years. Only during 2004 did researchers finally obtain photographs of a living individual beneath the Pacific Ocean. Its close relative, the colossal squid, first entered science during 1925 and exceeds 30 feet in total length, yet it has still never been photographed alive within its natural habitat. Both animals inhabit oceans spanning the entire planet, illustrating how immense size alone offers no guarantee of frequent observation. Large marine mammals provide another reminder that hidden diversity persists. During 2020, researchers confirmed the existence of Ramari's beaked whale from evidence associated with a single-stranded specimen found near New Zealand. Before that confirmation, the species had escaped formal recognition despite belonging to one of the largest groups of living mammals. Beaked whales remain among the least understood creatures inhabiting the sea. One known species routinely dives to depths approaching 9,816 feet, deeper than any other mammal presently documented. Individuals spend so little time at the surface that many aspects of their behavior remain uncertain even today. Not every astonishing animal belongs to the deep sea's largest predators. Along a Scottish beach during 1864, naturalists measured an extraordinary ribbon worm identified as Linnaeus longissimus. That specimen reached approximately 180 feet in length, making it the longest animal ever reliably recorded. Unlike a whale or squid, however, a ribbon worm possesses an exceptionally flexible body capable of contracting into a much shorter form before extending again. Should only part of such an animal appear above the surface, its undulating movements could produce a silhouette unlike anything described within traditional field guides. Modern exploration continues expanding the catalog of marine life at a remarkable pace. Deep-sea trawling operations regularly recover organisms never previously described by science. The International Census of Marine Life, conducted between 2000 and 2010, estimated that approximately 750,000 marine species remain undiscovered. Most of those hidden organisms will be small, obscure, or confined to specialized habitats beyond ordinary human reach. Even so, a small fraction will inevitably include animals large enough to be noticed whenever unusual circumstances bring them toward the surface. For generations, skeptics have argued that any substantial unknown creature would surely have been discovered already. The ocean has answered that assumption repeatedly, not through speculation but through documented discoveries arriving decade after decade. Its vastness has never promised endless monsters, yet neither has it yielded every secret at once. The enduring lesson is therefore remarkably modest. The remaining mystery is no longer whether undiscovered large marine animals can exist. History has settled that question many times. What remains uncertain is which creatures still await recognition, and on what unanticipated day the sea will choose to reveal them. Across centuries of storytelling, countless details changed with language, landscape, and imagination. Length varied from one witness to another. Heads resembled horses, turtles, dragons, or unfamiliar fishes. Bodies appeared smooth in one account and ridged in the next. Yet among this diversity, one remarkably specific feature returned with surprising persistence. Again and again, observers separated by oceans and generations described a vivid crest rising from the head or extending along the neck, glowing red, fiery, or brilliantly colored against the surrounding water. Such consistency deserves careful attention because distinctive anatomical details are far less likely to emerge independently through chance alone than broad descriptions such as long bodies or large size. Human cultures often create different names for unfamiliar animals, yet they tend to preserve unusual physical characteristics whenever those features leave a lasting impression. In the long history of reported sea serpents, the recurring appearance of a crimson mane stands apart from nearly every other repeated description. The modern oarfish possesses precisely such a structure. Running from the crown of its head and continuing along the length of its back is an elongated dorsal fin, supported by more than 400 individual fin rays. Each ray carries vivid scarlet pigmentation, creating a brilliant ribbon of red, unlike the coloration of almost any other large marine fish. Whenever an injured or distressed individual rises toward the surface, those rays may stand prominently above the body, remaining visible even from considerable distance across open water. Within the old traditions of Scandinavia, descriptions sometimes spoke of a creature bearing a flaming mane flowing above its neck. The language reflected familiar images drawn from horses, fire, and myth, yet the underlying observation remained centered upon an unusually bright ridge along the upper portion of the animal. Far across the Pacific, Japanese traditions surrounding the messenger from the Dragon King's palace likewise emphasized a striking red crown or ceremonial headdress. Although the surrounding stories differed profoundly, the visual detail persisted with remarkable fidelity. Scottish accounts added another variation, describing bright red or orange bristles surrounding the neck of the mysterious animal. During the 19th century, observers along the American coastline occasionally referred to a red frill or crest rising above the head. Reports gathered from Brazilian waters echoed similar impressions despite developing within a different cultural landscape. Each witness reached for familiar comparisons rooted in local language, yet those metaphors repeatedly circled around the same anatomical feature rather than wandering toward entirely different colors or forms. Coincidence becomes increasingly difficult to invoke as identical details accumulate across geographically separated traditions. Independent cultures certainly share broad human experiences, but the repeated appearance of a scarlet crest attached to a long marine animal represents a surprisingly specific point of agreement. A more economical explanation is that people living in distant places occasionally encountered the same remarkable fish and interpreted its appearance through different cultural vocabularies while preserving the essential visual. Observation. This conclusion does not require every reported serpent to become an oarfish. Earlier portions of this journey have revealed whales, giant squid, decomposing sharks, dolphins, and other marine animals contributing their own pieces to the larger mosaic. The ocean contains many sources of ambiguity. Even so, among all proposed explanations, the oarfish provides perhaps the closest correspondence to one of the most distinctive recurring characteristics preserved across the historical record. Rather than solving every mystery, it explains one of the oldest and most consistent threads woven through them. Another subtle quality may have strengthened those unforgettable encounters. Scientific observations indicate that the oarfish is capable of producing bioluminescence under certain conditions. A weakened or distressed individual reaching the surface after dark may therefore display faint living light along portions of its body while its scarlet crest rises above the water. For observers possessing no knowledge of deep-sea biology, such a combination would have appeared unlike any familiar fish. A luminous body, crowned with crimson rays, required no embellishment to inspire enduring memory. Nature itself had already assembled an appearance capable of crossing languages, coastlines, and centuries, while leaving behind remarkably similar descriptions wherever that extraordinary traveler briefly entered the human world. Ideas rarely travel across oceans by themselves. They move aboard ships, within journals, across folded maps, and through conversations shared in crowded ports. Every published account carries more than information. It provides future observers with a vocabulary, a mental picture, and a set of expectations that quietly accompany them whenever they look across unfamiliar water. Over time, those expectations become part of the history they help create. The enduring record of sea serpent reports reflects this gradual exchange between observation and communication. Rather than maintaining a steady presence across every generation, reports often appeared in noticeable clusters following influential publications. The pattern suggests more than coincidence. It reveals a continuing dialogue between what people encountered upon the sea and what they already believed might be waiting there. One of the earliest examples emerged after Olaus Magnus published his celebrated map during 1539. For roughly 150 years, copies circulated throughout northern Europe depicting formidable marine creatures inhabiting northern waters. Mariners studying those images before departure carried them into the Atlantic alongside practical charts and navigational knowledge. Whenever unfamiliar animals later appeared under difficult viewing conditions, the published illustrations offered recognizable forms into which uncertain observations could naturally settle. A similar sequence unfolded after Erik Pontoppidan assembled his extensive catalogue of Norwegian sea serpent accounts during 1752. As those descriptions reached wider audiences, reports from Norwegian waters became noticeably more frequent during the following years. The publication did not place new animals into the sea. Instead, it placed a shared interpretive framework into the minds of readers who later encountered unusual sights upon the water. Another important example developed around Gloucester during 1817. After witnesses described the remarkable creature observed near Cape Ann, the Linnean Society distributed a pamphlet formally introducing the proposed scientific name Scoliophis atlanticus. That publication accomplished something subtle yet powerful. It transformed an isolated observation into a recognized category. Anyone afterward encountering an unfamiliar marine form within the same harbor possessed not only a story, but also an accepted description and scientific language through which the experience could be organized and reported. The widely circulated accounts surrounding the Daedalus encounter during 1848 followed a comparable course. Newspapers carried the testimony of respected naval officers across Britain and beyond, allowing readers throughout the maritime world to picture the reported animal with remarkable clarity. Within the following year, 2 additional credible sightings emerged from the same Atlantic transit region. Such sequences illustrate how publication can influence not merely public curiosity, but also the frequency with which ambiguous encounters receive particular interpretations. Modern psychology recognizes this process as entirely ordinary rather than exceptional. Whenever culture supplies a familiar explanation for uncertain experiences, that explanation becomes more readily available during future moments of ambiguity. Comparable feedback patterns have appeared within reports involving unidentified flying objects, cattle mutilations, and many other unusual phenomena. The mechanism depends neither upon dishonesty nor imagination alone. It arises because human perception naturally incorporates memory, expectation, and shared cultural knowledge while constructing meaningful interpretations from incomplete sensory information. The history of sea serpents nevertheless retains an important distinction. Beneath the accumulating layers of expectation stood authentic encounters with living marine animals. Earlier passages through this journey have introduced oarfish, displaying scarlet dorsal crests, whales surfacing in deceptive formations, decomposing basking sharks acquiring unfamiliar proportions, and giant squid whose anatomy once exceeded ordinary belief. Those animals existed independently of every legend, inspired by their appearance. The cultural feedback loop shaped how witnesses described them, but it did not create the underlying encounters from nothing. Understanding this relationship resolves several long-standing puzzles simultaneously. It explains why reports frequently clustered within particular regions after influential publications. It clarifies why descriptions borrowed recurring language from earlier accounts even when witnesses acted sincerely. It also reveals how traditions sustain themselves across centuries without requiring continuous encounters of identical frequency. Most importantly, the feedback loop stops at the boundary where observation begins. It accounts for the persistence of names, metaphors, and expectations carried from one generation to the next. It cannot fully explain why those recurring descriptions, once stripped of folklore and literary embellishment, repeatedly converge upon anatomical features belonging to genuine marine animals. In that meeting place between culture and biology, the sea serpent endures, not as a single creature swimming unchanged through history, but as a remarkably consistent conversation between the human mind and the living ocean that continues to inspire it. Some discoveries do not overturn history. Instead, they return to it with new evidence in hand. Centuries of disputed observations, forgotten journal entries, and weathered maritime traditions can suddenly appear in a different light when a single documented encounter reveals that an impossible-looking animal has been real all along. During the early years of the 21st century, one such moment unfolded beneath the waters of the North Pacific. On the 30th of September, 2004, Japanese researchers Tsunami Kubodera and Kyoichi Mori lowered a specially prepared camera system together with bait and a depth recorder to approximately 3,000 feet near the Ogasawara Islands. The equipment descended into a realm where sunlight had long since faded, a place visited more often by drifting particles than by human eyes. Nothing about the expedition depended upon luck alone. It reflected years of planning based upon whale movements, previous evidence, and careful understanding of deep ocean ecology. At 15 minutes past 9 that morning, the waiting equipment recorded an unmistakable encounter. Something powerful struck the bait. Rather than producing a single blurred image, the automatic camera continued working as events unfolded. Over roughly 4 hours, it captured 556 photographs, documenting one of the most important observations in marine biology. The images revealed a giant squid measuring approximately 26 feet in length, approaching the bait with remarkable determination. Instead of drifting passively through darkness, the animal attacked decisively, extending its feeding tentacles toward the target. During the struggle, one elongated tentacle became entangled in the equipment. The squid repeatedly attempted to free itself, pulling with tremendous force for more than 4 hours before finally escaping. When it disappeared back into the depths, the severed tentacle remained behind, stretching approximately 18 feet in length and providing valuable biological material for scientific examination. The following year, the photographs appeared within the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, reaching researchers around the world before quickly becoming front-page news for the general public. For the first time, humanity possessed clear images of Architeuthis ducks alive within its natural environment. Earlier knowledge had depended largely upon stranded carcasses, damaged remains recovered from whale stomachs, or dying animals brought accidentally to the surface. Those fragmentary glimpses had never fully revealed how the giant squid actually behaved while healthy and hunting within its own habitat. Perhaps the greatest surprise involved not the squid's size, but its behavior. The photographs demonstrated an energetic predator capable of rapid movement and sustained effort. Its response to the bait displayed speed, coordination, and persistence rather than sluggish drifting. This living animal actively pursued prey instead of merely waiting for food to arrive. Such observations reshaped scientific understanding while unexpectedly echoing portions of much older maritime testimony. For generations, stories describing enormous tentacled creatures reaching upward from the sea had often been dismissed because the underlying animal seemed biologically implausible. Although dramatic tales of attacks upon entire ships clearly belonged within folklore, the photographs established that the giant squid itself possessed neither a passive nature nor weak musculature. An animal capable of forcefully seizing bait, struggling continuously for hours, and tearing away with tremendous strength no longer resembled the helpless drifting giant imagined by many earlier researchers. The historical journey continued during 2012, when researchers successfully recorded the first moving images of a living giant squid. Later expeditions added further footage from different regions, gradually transforming an animal once known only through scattered fragments into a documented resident of the deep ocean. Each successful observation reduced the distance between legend and direct evidence without diminishing the extraordinary appearance of the creature itself. The importance of those first photographs therefore extends beyond the confirmation of a remarkable species. They completed a historical circle stretching across roughly 250 years, from the earliest widely circulated kraken descriptions to unmistakable visual documentation of the living animal. The old sailors had not invented every detail correctly, nor had every tale reflected literal events. Yet beneath exaggeration, misunderstanding, and generations of skepticism, they had encountered something genuine. The sea had preserved that truth long before science possessed the tools required to see it clearly. The ocean does not announce when one of its hidden inhabitants approaches the shoreline. There are no ceremonies marking the arrival, only the ordinary rhythm of tides carrying an unfamiliar body toward beaches where people pause, gather, and attempt to understand what they have found. Even within the modern world, surrounded by cameras and scientific knowledge, those first moments often resemble the beginning of much older stories. Oarfish continue washing ashore in many parts of the world with surprising regularity. During 2013 and 2014, several individuals measuring up to 18 feet appeared along the California coastline within only a few weeks of one another. Each discovery quickly attracted local attention as photographs spread through newspapers and television broadcasts. Before marine biologists completed formal examinations, many beachgoers and reporters instinctively described the remarkable fish using the language of sea serpents. The comparison emerged almost automatically because the animal's extraordinary appearance still lies well outside ordinary experience. Nothing about those stranded oarfish differed fundamentally from their distant ancestors that once surfaced before wooden sailing ships. Their silver bodies remained astonishingly long and narrow. Their scarlet dorsal crest still rose above the head with the same vivid color preserved across generations. Their unfamiliar proportions continued resisting easy comparison with the fishes most people recognized. Modern observers possessed access to field guides and digital photographs, yet the first impression often echoed descriptions recorded centuries earlier. An equally remarkable sequence unfolded in Japanese coastal waters between January of 2014 and March of 2015. During that period, researchers documented 57 giant squid appearing within the Sea of Japan, representing the largest recorded mass appearance of the species. Most reached the surface only shortly before death. Even so, each enormous animal drifting beside a fishing vessel or floating near shore would have presented an unforgettable silhouette. Had identical events occurred during earlier centuries, nearly every encounter would almost certainly have entered local tradition as another report of an immense marine monster. Traditional beliefs also remain intertwined with living experience. Fishing communities throughout Japan have long regarded stranded oarfish as possible signs preceding earthquakes. When several individuals appeared within Toyama Bay during late 2019 and early 2020, local news organizations noted the enduring association between the fish and seismic activity. Scientific investigation has not established a reliable connection, and researchers continue debating whether any meaningful relationship exists. The tradition nevertheless survives, because remarkable animals naturally become woven into broader patterns through which communities interpret the changing world around them. Another seldom encountered inhabitant of the sea contributes its own layer to this continuing story. Modern collections have confirmed ribbon worms exceeding 100 feet in length, although their remarkably flexible bodies contract dramatically whenever disturbed. A healthy individual moving freely near the surface would display long, flowing curves unlike those of fish, whales, or squid. Anyone encountering such an animal without prior knowledge would possess no familiar category into which its appearance comfortably belonged. Description would inevitably arrive before identification. These continuing encounters reveal something profoundly consistent about the relationship between humanity and the sea. The ocean still delivers unexpected animals to the surface without warning, just as it has for countless generations. Some now carry established scientific names supported by careful anatomical study. Others remain unfamiliar, even to experienced travelers who rarely encounter life from the deeper regions of the water column. Knowledge has expanded enormously, yet surprise remains an ordinary feature of marine discovery. Perhaps the greatest change has occurred not within the animals themselves, but within the minds of those who observe them. A stranded oarfish discovered during 2024 presents essentially the same extraordinary form that would have appeared before coastal communities during 1648. Its elongated body, brilliant crest, and improbable proportions have remained products of biology rather than imagination. The difference lies within the interpretive framework brought by the observer. Today, some people recognize an oarfish immediately, while others still glimpse a serpent emerging from the oldest pages of maritime memory before science gently supplies another name for the very same living creature. Long before an unfamiliar creature received a scientific name, it first received a human one. That first act rarely emerged from certainty. It arose from recognition reaching beyond the limits of language as an observer searched for familiar words capable of holding an unfamiliar reality. Every reported sea serpent began in that same moment, when something living appeared before human eyes without an existing place inside everyday vocabulary. At its heart, each historical sighting represented an act of naming. Sailors, fishermen, naturalists, and coastal communities encountered animals unlike anything described within the books they carried or the conversations they inherited. Faced with forms that resisted ordinary classification, they selected the nearest available concept. Within cultures already rich with serpent traditions, the choice often became inevitable. The creature before them possessed length, movement, and unfamiliar proportions. The word serpent gathered those impressions together, even when the living animal belonged to an entirely different branch of the natural world. Modern studies of language reveal that vocabulary influences perception in measurable ways. People possessing different sets of color words often remember and distinguish shades differently because language provides boundaries through which experience is organized. The same principle extends beyond color into many aspects of observation. Without an established word for oarfish, an encounter with an oarfish could scarcely become anything else in memory except a remarkable serpent. The biological identity remained hidden, while the visual impression found its place within the linguistic framework already available. This perspective also restores dignity to the historical witnesses whose accounts have often been dismissed too easily. Naval officers recording careful log entries, fishermen describing extraordinary catches, ministers preserving local testimony, and citizens submitting sworn depositions were not necessarily inventing impossible creatures. They were attempting something profoundly ordinary. Each person sought to communicate an authentic experience to readers who had not stood upon the same deck or shoreline. Their reports reflected the difficult task of translating direct observation into shared language without possessing the scientific categories that later generations would eventually inherit. Seen through that lens, the sea serpent becomes less a single legendary animal than a collective label attached to many genuine encounters. It preserves a record of the ocean's remarkable diversity compressed into one imperfect term. Behind that familiar word stood elongated fishes, unusual whales, immense cephalopods, decomposing carcasses, transformed by natural processes, and other marine organisms whose appearance exceeded common expectation. The legend simplified them. Biology, when finally uncovered, proved even more extraordinary than the mythology attempting to describe it. Consider the living oarfish. Rather than resembling a conventional serpent, it possesses a mirror-bright body extending as much as 36 feet in length, crowned by vivid scarlet fin rays, and capable of swimming vertically through deep water before occasionally reaching the surface in distress. No traditional dragon or sea snake anticipated such anatomy. Reality assembled something stranger than folklore imagined. The giant squid offers another example. Stretching beyond 40 feet, equipped with eyes measuring roughly 11 inches across, and hunting actively within darkness more than 1,000 feet beneath the surface. It combines enormous scale with sophisticated predatory behavior. Earlier generations lacked words capable of expressing such an animal because no comparable creature existed within ordinary experience. The available language therefore bent toward monsters while the underlying organism remained entirely real. Even a decomposing basking shark demonstrates how unfamiliar natural processes can reshape perception. As soft tissues disappear, cartilage and connective structures create proportions that appear almost impossible, transforming an ordinary shark into a form unlike any recognized species. Chemistry alone accomplishes that remarkable transformation without requiring imagination to alter the evidence. Looking backward across centuries, the reports preserved in journals, newspapers, scientific societies, and family traditions reveal something more enduring than mistaken identification. They preserve humanity's repeated effort to describe encounters that exceeded the descriptive tools of their age. The serpent was never merely an invention born from fear or credulity. It became the largest available container into which observers poured experiences that refused smaller categories. Time eventually supplied better names for many of those creatures, yet the original witnesses had already pointed toward the correct waters. Their language remained imperfect, but their encounters often rested upon living realities that science would spend generations gradually learning to recognize. The edges of the old maps have changed. Where early chartmakers once placed marvelous creatures beside uncertain coastlines, modern navigation presents carefully measured shorelines, depth soundings, current patterns, and precise coordinates extending across the sea. The painted serpents have disappeared from the margins, their curling forms replaced by numbers and contour lines that promise confidence rather than speculation. At first glance, it seems as though mystery itself has retreated before measurement. Yet the empty spaces left behind are not truly empty. They represent an ocean covering nearly 3/4 of Earth's surface, an immense realm whose deepest landscapes remain only partially known. Less than 1/5 of the seafloor has been mapped in high resolution. Vast underwater mountains, valleys, plains, and trenches still await the same careful attention already given to continents above the waves. In many respects, the deep ocean floor has received less detailed survey than the surface of Mars, reminding us that distance is not measured only by miles. Sometimes it is measured by the difficulty of reaching a place hidden beneath water. Within that immense blue world, the animals woven throughout this journey continue their lives entirely unaware of the stories they inspired. Oarfish still drift through profound darkness in a vertical posture unlike almost any other large fish, inhabiting every major ocean across the globe. Giant squid remain active hunters more than 1,000 feet beneath the surface, pursuing prey beyond ordinary human sight. Basking sharks continue filtering plankton along coastlines, bordering every inhabited continent, their immense bodies passing unnoticed beneath countless vessels. Far within the Southern Ocean, colossal squid continue living according to rhythms that no researcher has yet witnessed in a healthy individual, moving freely through its natural environment. The catalog of marine life has also continued expanding in ways that would have surprised earlier generations of naturalists. The megamouth shark remained entirely unknown until 1976, despite reaching impressive size. During 2005, researchers formally described the Yeti crab, revealing another remarkable adaptation from the deep sea. The Dumbo octopus, now familiar through underwater imagery, was first filmed during 1990. Expeditions returning from deep water continue delivering organisms unlike those previously recognized, demonstrating that discovery has become an ongoing process rather than a completed achievement. Each new species quietly reinforces an important lesson. Declaring the ocean fully understood has repeatedly proven less reliable than approaching it with patient curiosity. Every decade has contributed animals that earlier generations never imagined, while others once dismissed as improbable gradually entered accepted scientific knowledge through careful observation and accumulated evidence. The pattern has remained remarkably consistent across centuries. After following so many reports, specimens, photographs, and histories, the old question surrounding sea serpents begins to change shape. The most honest answer is neither complete acceptance nor complete rejection. The legendary serpent, imagined as a single, undiscovered creature matching every tale, did not inhabit the sea in the form preserved by folklore. Yet the living animals inspiring those reports proved no less extraordinary simply because they belonged to known branches of biology. In many cases, their genuine anatomy surpassed the imagination that first attempted to describe them. The witnesses whose names appeared within ships' logs, scientific societies, newspapers, and sworn statements were not attempting to describe an ocean that failed to exist. They were describing the ocean before them, using the richest language available within their own time. Their words carried uncertainty, metaphor, and occasional misunderstanding, yet they also carried careful observation directed towards something undeniably real. That same ocean still surrounds every coastline today. Beneath its shifting surface remain animals already known, animals only partly understood, and others that have not yet entered any scientific catalog. Somewhere, another observer will eventually lean over a rail, glimpse an unfamiliar form rising from the water, and begin the timeless human work of giving a name to something the sea has kept to itself.